My best friend falsely testified against me so he could steal my family from me. It is now 13 years later, and I just found out he is laying hands on my daughter. I am going nuclear. My name is Amber, 34 years old, and tonight the empire built on my stolen child is going to burn. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight back against those who tried to destroy you. The grand ballroom of the Chicago Heritage Hotel smelled of roasted duck, expensive orchids, and old money. I stood completely still near the massive marble pillars by the coat check, observing the political fundraiser from the shadows. The crystal chandeliers cast a harsh, glittering light over the city elite. I had spent the last decade building myself into an impenetrable fortress, but seeing him in person made my blood run freezing cold. Then he appeared. Brandon. The man who had orchestrated the absolute destruction of my life 13 years ago. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo, a heavy diamond watch gleaming on his wrist, and the exact same arrogant, untouchable smirk I remembered from the courtroom. I remembered how he had stood before the judge weeping fake tears as he swore he had found bags of narcotics hidden inside my baby's crib. He walked straight toward me, holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne. He did not hesitate. Without a single word of warning, he deliberately tipped his glass forward. The freezing liquid cascaded down the front of my custom silk gown, soaking immediately through the dark fabric and dripping heavily onto my designer heels. The sheer disrespect was a calculated move designed to break my composure in a room full of powerful people. How did a junkie who lost her kids sneak past my security team? Brandon sneered, his voice dropping to a vicious, venomous whisper. You are trespassing at my fundraiser. You are a permanent stain on this family. Get out of my sight before I call the police and have you dragged out of here in handcuffs like the criminal you are. I did not cry. I did not flinch. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I had spent years mastering my own emotions. I slowly pulled a silk handkerchief from my clutch and wiped the champagne from my dress with absolute chilling precision. I looked him dead in the eye, refusing to look away. Your security team is entirely incompetent, Brandon, I replied, my voice steady and cold. Just like your political campaign. Before he could retaliate with another insult, a young girl rounded the corner, running blindly away from the main banquet hall. She crashed directly into Brandon's side. It was Lily, my biological daughter. She was 14 years old now. I had not seen her face outside of stolen blurry photographs in over a decade. Her eyes were wide with sheer terror, her breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. Brandon's expression instantly shifted from arrogant politician to pure monster. He reached out and violently grabbed Lily by the upper arm. He yanked her backward with such brutal, unforgiving force that her feet nearly left the polished marble floor. The sudden violent motion caused her delicate silk sleeve to ride up to her shoulder. There, stark and ugly against her pale skin, was a fresh, dark purple bruise. It was the undeniable, sickening shape of a large adult handprint. Lily trembled violently, pulling her arm desperately, trying to escape his crushing grip. Her terrified eyes locked onto mine. She did not know who I was, but she knew she needed help. Brandon tightened his grip, his knuckles turning white as he dug his fingers into her injured flesh. My daughter is clumsy, he snarled at me, pushing Lily roughly behind his back. Move out of the way right now. I did not ask for permission. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us in a fraction of a second. I grabbed Brandon's wrist with my right hand, dug my thumb hard into his radial nerve, and twisted his arm sharply backward. It was a flawless joint lock I had paid a private security instructor thousands of dollars to teach me. Brandon gasped in sudden, blinding pain. His fingers sprang open instantly as the pressure threatened to snap his wrist. Lily stumbled back, clutching her bruised arm, breathing heavily against the wall. What on earth are you doing? The shrill, demanding voice belonged to Catherine, my mother. She rushed over with my father, William, trailing close behind. They did not look at Lily. They did not look at the massive, hand-shaped bruise on their granddaughter's arm. Instead, Catherine marched straight up to me, raised her heavily ringed hand, and slapped me across the face with all her strength. The sharp crack echoed off the marble pillars, drawing the attention of several passing waiters. The physical sting was absolutely nothing compared to the lifetime of betrayal they had inflicted upon me. "Are you completely insane?" Catherine hissed aggressively, adjusting her diamond necklace. "You are assaulting the guest of honor. You are assaulting your own brother-in-law in public." I stood perfectly still. I ignored the burning sensation on my cheek. I simply smiled. I raised my left hand and tapped the screen of my smartwatch. The device vibrated twice against my wrist. It was the confirmation signal I had been waiting for. Standing that close to Brandon during the physical altercation, I had just finished wirelessly cloning every single gigabyte of encrypted data from the smartphone sitting in his breast pocket. The proximity protocol had successfully bypassed his commercial-grade firewall. The data packet contained 13 years of his secrets, his bribes, and his financial crimes, all silently downloading into my encrypted servers. I had his emails, I had his bank records, I had his entire digital life resting securely on my wrist. Let them slap me. I had already won the war. William stepped forward intentionally, raising his booming voice to draw the attention of the surrounding gala attendees. He wanted a large audience for my destruction, just like he had always demanded in the past. "Security! Get this woman out of here right now!" my father demanded, pointing a trembling, furious finger directly at my chest. "She is delusional. She does not belong here." 13 years ago, Brandon had to testify under oath because she was hiding narcotics in her apartment. He stepped up to raise her child when the state rightfully took the girl away. Brandon saved our other daughter, Courtney, from having a drug addict for a sister. He is a respected developer. She is a convicted criminal. Catherine chimed in, making sure the gathering crowd heard every toxic manufactured word. "You have been psychotic since the court stripped your custody, Amber. You are a danger to society. Brandon has provided a beautiful, stable home for Lily. You are nothing but a jealous, violent failure." They were rewriting history in real time. They were delivering the exact same vicious lies they had used to destroy my life 13 years ago. They weaponized my trauma for a captive audience, elevating my abuser while treating me like absolute dirt on their expensive shoes. The heavy, synchronized footsteps of hotel security guards approached rapidly from the hallway. Just as they were about to grab my arms and drag me away, Simone stepped directly into the center of the hostile circle. Simone was my brother Colin's wife. She was a brilliant corporate attorney, a striking black woman of African descent, and the only person in my toxic family who possessed an actual moral compass. She knew the reality of Brandon's abuse, but was forced to play along to protect her own career within the family's corrupt legal network. Simone deliberately caught her high heel on the hem of her emerald evening gown. She stumbled forward with calculated precision, crashing heavily into my chest. I caught her shoulders firmly to keep us both from falling to the polished floor. Under the guise of gripping my hands to steady herself, Simone seamlessly slid a tiny hard object into my palm, a micro USB drive. "High is worse than you think," Simone whispered directly into my ear, her voice barely audible over the growing commotion of the crowd. "Get out of here now." Simone stepped back immediately, apologizing loudly for her clumsiness and smoothing her dress as if nothing had happened. The security guards reached out to grab my shoulders. "Do not touch me," I commanded, my voice slicing through the thick tension like a surgical blade. The guards hesitated, unnerved by my absolute lack of fear. I smoothed the front of my ruined champagne-soaked silk gown. I reached calmly into my designer clutch and pulled out a solid black heavyweight titanium card. It caught the brilliant light of the overhead chandeliers, gleaming with quiet authority. I dropped it onto the marble floor directly at my father's feet, letting it clatter loudly against the stone. "I am not sneaking in, William. That is a VIP all-access pass. I am the CEO and sole owner of Zenith Cyber Defense." Brandon's arrogant smirk vanished completely. The color drained entirely from his face as the realization hit him like a physical blow. He knew the name of the company handling his campaign security, but he had never bothered to look up the anonymous board of directors. "Yes, Brandon," I said, locking eyes with him and watching his chest heave with sudden, uncontrollable panic. "The exact same cybersecurity firm your political campaign hired to protect all donor financial data for this entire gala tonight. You paid my company $500,000 to secure your network." I stepped around him, pausing just long enough to deliver the final crushing blow. Your security contract is officially canceled, effective immediately. Good luck protecting your wealthy donors from the inevitable data breaches. I turned and walked out of the hotel. I did not look back at my screaming parents. I did not look back at the confused crowd of politicians. I marched straight through the revolving glass doors and stepped into the freezing Chicago night air. My private security detail immediately opened the heavy door to my armored SUV. I climbed into the back seat and locked the doors behind me. My heart was hammering relentlessly against my ribs, but my hands were completely steady. I pulled out my secure, military-grade laptop and plugged Simone's micro USB drive into the side port. The decryption software ran for 3 agonizing seconds before a hidden nanny cam video file instantly popped up on the high-resolution screen. I clicked play, holding my breath. The footage showed the interior of Brandon's massive modern kitchen. The timestamp indicated it was recorded yesterday afternoon. The video showed Brandon screaming viciously at Lily. It showed him pulling his arm back and striking my daughter across the face with the back of his hand, sending her crashing hard against the oak cabinets. My blood ran completely cold. The video then cut abruptly to a second, even more terrifying clip. This one showed Brandon cornering my younger sister Courtney against the kitchen counter. His hands were wrapped tightly around her throat. He was physically suffocating her, lifting her off the floor, his face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. As I watched the horrifying reality of what was happening inside that perfect suburban house, a text message from an encrypted number popped up on my secure dashboard line. It was from Simone. He owns the local precinct. He pays off the judges. You are her only hope. Save them. I slammed the laptop shut, the image of my daughter's bruised face burning into my mind. The time for hiding was over. The war had officially begun. The morning light cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my command center at Zenith Cyber Defense. My lead decryption specialist sat beside me, his fingers flying across the keyboard as lines of code from Brandon's cloned phone flooded our secure servers. We had successfully bypassed his commercial-grade firewall, and raw data was cascading across the wall-sized monitors. We were minutes away from unlocking the core encrypted folders when the heavy glass doors of my office swung open. My head of security stepped inside, accompanied by a nervous-looking process server clutching a thick manila envelope. The server handed it to me without a single word and practically ran out of the room. I ripped open the seal. It was an emergency restraining order signed by a local family court judge. I scanned the legal jargon, my blood boiling as I read the justification. Brandon had used his deep pockets to purchase a corrupt magistrate. The document cited my fabricated drug possession charges from 13 years ago, declaring me a severe, unstable, and immediate threat to minors. The order legally banned me from coming within 500 feet of Lily or my sister Courtney. Right on cue, my personal phone vibrated on the desk. A text message from Brandon illuminated the screen. The law says you are crazy. Stay away from my family. I did not throw the phone. I did not yell. I simply forwarded the document to my legal department with a single instruction to stall the proceedings. My corporate lawyers immediately began flooding my inbox with urgent warnings, advising me to comply and fight the order through proper legal channels. I ignored every single one of them. Following the rules was exactly how I lost my daughter the first time. I was not going to play his rigged game again. I grabbed my coat and took my private elevator down to the subterranean parking garage. I drove my armored SUV to an abandoned underground loading dock on the south side of the city. I had personally outfitted the location with military-grade signal jammers. There was no cell service, no GPS tracking, and no possibility of listening devices. Simone was already waiting in the shadows, leaning against her sleek sedan. Simone was my brother Colin's wife, a razor-sharp black woman of African descent who had spent years silently observing the deep-rooted rot within my family. She had tolerated their constant microaggressions because she knew staying close was the only way to gather the intelligence needed to destroy them. The fierce protective fire in her dark eyes told me she was ready for war. She did not waste time with pleasantries. "He is moving faster than we anticipated," Simone said, handing me a physical printed ledger. I pulled this from the firm's internal network before I left the office. Look at the routing numbers. I reviewed the spreadsheet, my eyes tracing the massive recurring wire transfers. He is laundering his political campaign donations, I said, mapping the money trail in my head. Simone nodded sharply. Yes, but look at where the clean money is going. He is washing millions of dollars through William and Catherine's offshore retirement accounts. Your parents are not just turning a blind eye to his abuse. They are financially tethered to his political survival. The sickening reality clicked into place. This was why my parents had so violently defended him at the gala the night before. This was why they had gleefully destroyed my life 13 years ago. They had traded their own granddaughter to a monster to finance their luxury cars and European vacations. Brandon had them completely trapped by their own greed. They got to maintain their lavish country club lifestyle, and he got a clean paper trail. If Brandon went down for federal fraud, my parents would go to federal prison right alongside him. Suddenly, a harsh, blaring alarm echoed from the dashboard of Simone's vehicle. It was an emergency notification from her encrypted work tablet. She snatched it up, her expression hardening as she read the incoming priority email. What is it? I asked, stepping closer. Simone let out a sharp, bitter laugh, her posture remaining absolutely rigid with defiance. He knows we are digging. Brandon just retaliated. I have been officially suspended from my law firm, pending a criminal investigation. She turned the screen to show me a fabricated internal audit report. He just framed me for embezzling $500,000 from the firm's escrow accounts. He planted a digital paper trail to lead directly to my personal banking app. High used his political leverage to force the senior partners into executing an emergency suspension. He wants to drain my resources and tie me up in federal litigation so I cannot represent you in custody court. He thinks stripping my credentials will leave you isolated. I expected panic, but Simone simply closed the tablet with a definitive snap. Her gaze met mine, completely fearless. If he thinks a fake paper trail is going to scare a black woman who fought her way to the top of corporate law, he has severely underestimated his opponent. I am going to tear his entire operation to the ground. We need to hit him where it hurts, I said, my mind racing through tactical counteroffensives. We need to strike his donors. Before we could formulate the next phase of the breach, a sharp buzzing sound interrupted us. It was my secure burner phone. I had secretly slipped the micro device into the lining of Lily's jacket. During the fraction of a second I was breaking Brandon's wrist at the gala. It was a direct, untraceable line to my private server. I answered immediately, pressing the phone tight against my ear. Amber, I said, my voice steady but urgent. Mom, Lily whispered. Her voice was trembling so violently I could barely make out the words. The sound of her calling me Mom for the first time in 13 years nearly brought me to my knees, but I forced myself to remain completely analytical. Where are you? I asked, signaling Simone to start tracing the exact geolocation. I am hiding in my bedroom closet. Lily sobbed softly, her breath catching in her throat. He is tearing the house apart. He knows you are looking into his business. He was screaming at Aunt Courtney, telling her that you are trying to ruin everything. He says it is my fault you found us. He says I am going in the basement tonight. I heard a loud, violent crash in the background of the call, followed by Courtney's muffled scream. The sound of heavy footsteps pounded against hardwood floors, growing louder and closer to the closet door. Do not make a sound, Lily, I commanded, my heart hammering against my ribs. I am coming for you right now. The line went dead. I turned to Simone, my voice sharp. Signal the strike team. We are going in. Within moments, my armored SUV was tearing through the Chicago streets, flanked by tactical vehicles carrying my elite private security detail. My dashboard monitor tracked the precise geolocation of the burner phone. I slipped into Lily's pocket. The blinking red dot was stationary inside the estate Brandon purchased using my family's stolen wealth. My attorneys blew up my phone with frantic messages, warning me that violating a restraining order would guarantee jail time. I shut off the screen. I was done playing by the rules Brandon bought. We reached the wrought iron gates of his fortress. My security director did not bother pressing the intercom. He rammed his reinforced bumper straight through the center lock, sending the metal gates screeching open. We roared up the circular driveway, tires tearing deep trenches into the manicured lawn. I stepped out of the vehicle before it fully stopped. My tactical team flanked me, moving with military precision. I did not knock. Two men kicked the heavy mahogany front doors with synchronized force that the wood splintered around the deadbolt, slamming the doors wide open. I marched directly into the grand dining room. Brandon was hosting an intimate, high-dollar political dinner for his affluent campaign donors. Waiters in crisp white shirts froze with silver trays in their hands. Wealthy politicians stared in shock. Sitting right at the head of the table, flanking Brandon, like proud bodyguards, were my parents. William and Catherine held their crystal wine glasses, their faces instantly twisting from smug satisfaction to pure outrage at me. William shot out of his velvet chair, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Are you completely out of your mind?" he screamed, spit flying from his lips as he pointed a trembling finger at my face. "You have a restraining order against you. You are a psychotic criminal. I am calling the police right now and having you thrown into a cell for trespassing." Catherine slammed her hands on the table, knocking over a centerpiece. "You are ruining your brother-in-law's fundraiser, you failure. Someone get this lunatic out of my sight." Brandon did not panic. He simply smirked, leaning back in his expensive leather chair, playing the calm, victimized family man for his wealthy donors. He casually raised two fingers in the air. His personal armed bodyguards immediately stepped out from the shadows of the dining room, reaching for the weapons holstered under their jackets. "Restrain her," Brandon ordered, his voice dripping with venomous authority. "Do whatever it takes to protect guests." My security chief stepped forward, drawing his weapon with blinding speed, immediately neutralizing the threat. My team of 12 heavily armed professionals instantly formed an impenetrable wall around me, forcing Brandon's men to back away with their hands raised. The wealthy donors began muttering in panic, some sliding out of their chairs to edge toward the exits. I walked calmly to the center of the lavish dining table, ignoring the screaming of my parents and the hostility of my abuser. I held a heavy legal binder in my right hand. I slammed it down onto the polished mahogany surface with enough force to rattle the fine china. "You are not calling anyone, William," I stated, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Nobody is trespassing here except for you." Brandon scoffed, crossing his arms. "You have lost your mind, Amber. I own this estate." I leaned forward, planting my hands firmly on the table. "You financed this estate, using a network of shell companies," I replied smoothly. "You leveraged the equity to fund your fraudulent political campaign, committing cross-collateral fraud. You missed two massive payments last month because my cybersecurity firm actively froze the offshore accounts you used to hide the stolen funds." I tapped my fingernail against the legal binder. "This house was officially put up for foreclosure yesterday by your creditors. I purchased the debt at exactly 8 o'clock this morning using a blind corporate trust. I am the sole owner of this property. You and your corrupt donors are standing in my dining room. I want you out right now." Catherine gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been struck. William stared at the documents, his eyes darting frantically across the legal seals and bank signatures, unable to comprehend that I had dismantled their golden child's empire in a single morning. While they stood paralyzed by the financial execution I delivered, I gave a sharp nod to my security chief. He and 3 men sprinted down the hallway toward the basement. We heard the crash of a reinforced door being kicked off its hinges. Shouts echoed from the lower level. A moment later, my men reappeared in the dining room. One guard was carrying Lily in his arms. She was crying hysterically, clutching her bruised arm, her face stained with tears. Courtney followed closely behind them, her face pale, trembling violently as she realized the depth of the nightmare she lived. Lily looked up, her tear-filled eyes locking onto mine. She reached out her small hand toward me. I stepped away from the table, my heart shattering and mending all at once, ready to pull my daughter into my arms and never let her go. But Brandon did not look defeated. He did not look like a man who had just lost his house, his family, and his political career. Instead, he let out a dark laugh that chilled the room. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a high-resolution tablet. He tapped the screen and slid it across the mahogany table toward me. "You think saving her matters?" Brandon taunted, a wicked, triumphant grin spreading across his face. You think you can just walk right in here and buy your way out of the past? Watch the news right now, Amber. I stared at the high-resolution screen of the tablet sliding across the polished mahogany table. The local news anchor looked grave as a breaking news banner flashed in vibrant red across the bottom of the broadcast. The headline read, Cyber CEO Amber linked to charity hack and attempted kidnapping. I felt my jaw tighten as the anchor detailed a fabricated story of epic proportions. According to the broadcast, a deranged violent stalker with a history of severe drug addiction had compromised a local children welfare database to track down a minor she was obsessed with. A photograph of my face from 13 years ago, the exact mugshot from the night Brandon planted those narcotics in my apartment, filled the screen. Brandon leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms with a smug, untouchable grin. "Turn the volume up," he commanded softly. "You are going to love this part." The anchor announced they had obtained exclusive leaked audio of the suspect. A voice recording began to play. It was my voice. Every inflection, every pitch, the exact cadence of my speech echoed loudly through the dining room. But I had never spoken the words pouring out of the device. "I do not care what it takes." The digital version of my voice hissed through the tablet speakers. "I will burn this entire family to the ground. I will slit Courtney's throat while she sleeps if she gets in my way, and I will drag Lily out of that house by her hair. Nobody can stop me." Courtney let out a terrified gasp, shrinking back against the hallway wall and clutching Lily tighter. My daughter trembled, staring at me with a fresh wave of confusion and fear. "It is a deepfake," I stated firmly, not breaking eye contact with Brandon. "You scraped my corporate keynote speeches and used an artificial intelligence generator to synthesize my voice. It is a pathetic, desperate parlor trick." "It does not matter what it is," Brandon countered smoothly. "It only matters what the public believes. And right now, the entire city believes you are a psychotic, homicidal addict who just broke into my home to murder my wife and steal a child." Right on cue. Catherine pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "I knew it!" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "I always knew you were completely insane. You have been a violent sociopath since you were a teenager. You lost your mind when the court rightfully took your baby away, and now you have come back to slaughter your own sister." William slammed his fist onto the dining table, rattling the fine china. "You belong in a maximum security psychiatric ward, Amber. Brandon has done nothing but protect this family from your toxic drug-fueled delusions. You are a monster." The sheer audacity of their gaslighting washed over me, but I refused to let it break my focus. They were watching my daughter cower with a fresh hand-shaped bruise on her arm, yet they were frantically protecting the man who put it there. They were more invested in maintaining their country club status and Brandon laundered campaign money than the safety of their own blood. I opened my mouth to issue a command to my security chief, but the sudden piercing wail of police sirens shattered the tension in the room. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the massive front windows of the estate. The screech of tires echoed off the driveway as multiple squad cars surrounded the property. "You see," Amber, Brandon said, standing up and adjusting his expensive silk tie. "I do not just own the media narrative. I own the local precinct. I am a major political donor. When I call the chief of police and tell him a deranged addict is trespassing and attempting to kidnap my daughter, they do not ask questions. They send the cavalry." Heavy-booted footsteps pounded against the front porch. A team of 6 uniformed police officers stormed through the splintered front doors, their hands resting aggressively on their holstered weapons. The lead officer, a heavy-set man with a gold badge gleaming on his chest, locked eyes with me instantly. "Amber, put your hands behind your back," the officer barked, stepping forcefully into the dining room. "You are under arrest for violating an emergency restraining order, breaking and entering, cyberterrorism, and attempted kidnapping." My private security detail immediately formed a tight protective ring around me. My men placed their hands on their tactical vests, silently communicating that they were ready to engage. The tension in the room spiked to a lethal level. The local police unholstered their weapons, aiming them directly at my team. "Stand down," I ordered my security chief, my voice slicing through the chaos. "If we engage local law enforcement, Brandon wins. He wants a shootout. He wants me dead or locked away on federal assault charges. Stand down right now." My men reluctantly lowered their hands and stepped aside, leaving me exposed. The lead officer lunged forward, grabbing my arm with excessive brutal force. He twisted my wrist behind my back, pulling out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "Take her away!" Catherine cheered from the head of the table, her face flushed with victorious cruelty. "Lock her up and throw away the key. She is a danger to us all. Thank God Brandon called you in time." William stepped up beside his son-in-law, patting Brandon proudly on the shoulder. "You are safe now, Courtney," my father called out to my sister, completely ignoring the fact that Courtney was physically shaking in terror from Brandon, not me. "Justice is finally being served." The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists. Brandon stepped close to me, leaning in so only I could hear his venomous whisper. "I told you, Amber. I own this city. You are going to rot in a cell, and I am going to make sure Lily forgets your name entirely." The officer shoved me forward, preparing to drag me out the front door. Suddenly, the screeching tires of a black government vehicle echoed from the driveway. The heavy front doors of the mansion were kicked open with earth-shattering force. "Release her immediately." The commanding voice belonged to Simone. My brilliant, fierce sister-in-law stormed into the grand foyer, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She was no longer playing the quiet, submissive family attorney. She was out for absolute blood. Flanking her on either side were two massive, heavily armed federal marshals, wearing tactical gear with the letters FBI emblazoned in bold yellow across their chests. The local police officers froze, their hands hovering over their weapons. The lead officer scowled. "This is a local jurisdiction matter, counselor. Back off." Simone did not flinch. She marched straight up to the corrupt local cop and slammed a sealed, heavily stamped legal document directly against his chest. "That is a federal injunction signed by a United States District Court judge," Simone declared, her voice ringing with absolute, untouchable authority. "It supersedes your bought and paid for local jurisdiction. Amber is a protected federal witness in an ongoing high-level racketeering and wire fraud investigation. If you do not take those handcuffs off her right this second, these marshals are going to arrest you for obstruction of a federal probe." The heavy silence in the dining room shattered the moment Simone slammed the federal injunction against the chest of the corrupt local officer. The federal marshals flanking my sister-in-law unholstered their weapons just enough to make their point clear. The local police backed away immediately, their hands raised in surrender. Brandon's smug expression dissolved into a mask of pure fury as he realized his purchased local jurisdiction had just been entirely overridden by the federal government. "You cannot touch her," Simone declared, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "Amber is a protected federal witness." But victory came with a bitter cost. Before I could reach Lily, a pair of social workers from Child Protective Services walked through the shattered front doors. Because of the fabricated kidnapping charges and the ongoing federal probe, the state mandated that Lily be placed in temporary protective custody. She could not come home with me, but she was finally out of Brandon's grasp. I knelt in the ruined foyer of the mansion, looking directly into my daughter's terrified eyes. I held her trembling hands and promised her I would burn the entire city down to bring her home. The federal marshals escorted me out, leaving Brandon and my parents screaming in the background. The fallout hit the next morning like a localized earthquake. Inside the secure glass walls of my corporate headquarters, the monitors displayed a financial bloodbath. Zenith cyber defense stock was plummeting. The deepfake audio Brandon had manufactured was playing on a continuous loop across every major national news network. My board of directors was panicking, demanding a polished public relations statement to salvage our corporate image. I silenced their calls. I was not going to play defense. On the massive screen, in the center of my command center, a popular morning talk show was airing a live interview. My parents, William and Catherine, were sitting on a plush studio couch, performing the roles of heartbroken victims for millions of viewers. Catherine dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue, staring into the camera. "Amber has always been deeply disturbed," my mother lied smoothly on national television. "We tried everything to help her 13 years ago, but the drugs completely destroyed her mind. Brandon stepped up and gave our granddaughter a perfect life. Now Amber is trying to violently tear our beautiful family apart. She belongs in a psychiatric ward." William nodded solemnly beside her, praising Brandon as a pillar of the community and a saint for putting up with my supposed insanity. They were publicly assassinating my character to protect their own offshore retirement accounts. They were willing to watch me go to federal prison just to maintain their country club memberships. My lead decryption specialist walked into the room, handing me a secure tablet. The decryption of Brandon's cloned phone was complete. We had the entire financial blueprint of his political empire. I did not issue a public relations statement. I went directly for his throat. I accessed the hidden routing numbers Simone had provided the previous day and cross-referenced them with Brandon cloned data. The corruption was staggering. Brandon was funneling millions of dollars in illegal campaign contributions through a network of shell companies in the Cayman Islands. He was bribing judges, paying off local police precincts, and financing his real estate developments with dirty money. I isolated the most damning financial ledgers and bypassed all standard media outlets. Using an untraceable encrypted network, I began dripping the raw, unedited financial records directly to the private inboxes of Brandon's most aggressive political rivals. I sent the transaction histories to ruthless investigative journalists who had been trying to expose his corruption for years. Within an hour, the first anonymous leak hit the internet. A local political blog published the exact wire transfer Brandon had used to bribe the family court judge 13 years ago. The spark had been lit. The inferno was coming. I was deep into tracing his secondary accounts when my security chief burst through my office doors. He did not have time to speak before Courtney pushed past him. My younger sister looked like a fragile, broken porcelain doll. Her designer clothes were rumpled, her face pale and streaked with fresh tears. She had somehow bypassed the lobby security, using her old emergency family clearance that I had neglected to revoke. "Amber, please," Courtney sobbed, her voice cracking as she rushed toward my desk. "You have to stop this. You are destroying my husband. You are destroying our entire family. The police are swarming our neighborhood. Brandon is losing his campaign donors. Why are you doing this to us?" I stood up, resting my hands firmly on my desk. I looked at the sister who had silently watched my life be ripped apart 13 years ago. Courtney had stood by while Brandon fabricated drug charges against me. She had happily stepped into my shoes, raising my daughter as her own, living in a mansion funded by my stolen wealth. "I am not destroying your family, Courtney," I replied, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "Your husband built a criminal empire on top of my stolen child. I am simply pulling the foundation out from under him." "He is a good man," Courtney cried, gripping the edge of my desk with white knuckles. "He saved me. He gave Lily a wonderful home. You are just bitter and jealous. You need to call off your lawyers and tell the press you made everything up. If you do not stop, Brandon says we will lose everything." I did not argue with her delusions. I did not yell. I calmly reached over and turned my massive ultra-high-definition monitor completely around so it faced her directly. "I am not the one destroying your life, Courtney," I said coldly. "Look at the screen. Look at exactly who you married and exactly what he has been doing behind your back all these long, miserable years, while you gladly played the role of the perfectly obedient wife." Courtney blinked, refusing to comprehend the sheer volume of data cascading across my ultra-high-definition monitor. I did not give her a chance to look away or make excuses. I tapped my keyboard, opening the first decrypted folder. Hundreds of text messages flooded the screen, accompanied by explicit photographs and hotel receipts. "These are from the last 6 months alone," I stated, my voice clinical and detached. "He has 3 active mistresses. One of them is the campaign manager you had dinner with last week. He bought her a condo in Miami, using funds from your personal trust account." Courtney staggered backward, shaking her head frantically. "No, no, that is impossible. Brandon manages my accounts to protect my wealth from taxes. He told me the withdrawals were for standard real estate investments." "He lied," I replied, pulling up the corresponding bank ledgers alongside the messages. "Look at the routing numbers, Courtney. He is not investing your inheritance. He is draining it dry. He has systematically siphoned over $12 million into offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Companies registered exclusively under his name. You have zero legal access to them. By the time his political campaign concludes, you will be completely bankrupt, and you will not even know it until the bank comes to foreclose on your house." Her eyes darted wildly across the glowing spreadsheets. The undeniable mathematical truth of her financial ruins stared right back at her. The illusion of her perfect wealthy marriage was crumbling brick by brick, but I was not finished. The financial devastation was just the warm-up. Money is easily replaced, I said, leaning forward, resting my hands flat on the desk. But this next part is why I bought that house out from under him. This is why I am ripping his entire world to shreds. I closed the financial ledgers and opened a video file. It was the raw, unedited nanny cam footage Simone had extracted from the estate. I pressed play. The video showed Brandon standing in his home office talking on his secure phone to an unknown medical associate. His voice was perfectly clear, echoing through the silent walls of my command center. "Courtney is becoming unstable." Brandon's voice sneered through the speakers. "She is highly emotional and completely dependent on me. Yes, I have the paperwork ready. Once the campaign secures the primary, I am initiating an involuntary psychiatric hold. 2 signatures from bribed physicians, and she will be locked away in a private facility indefinitely. I will retain full power of attorney over her remaining assets and sole custody of Lily. It will be the tragic story of a devoted husband dealing with a mentally ill wife. The voters will eat it up." The video ended. The silence in my office was deafening. Courtney collapsed. Her knees simply gave out and she fell hard onto the polished concrete floor. She did not scream. She let out a hollow, agonizing gasp, grasping her chest as if she had been physically impaled. 13 years. For 13 years she had paraded around as the golden child, the chosen daughter who had succeeded where I had failed. She had smugly raised my biological daughter, believing Brandon was a savior who rescued them both from a drug addict. Now the brutal, suffocating reality crushed her. She was never his partner. She was a piggy bank, a convenient, naive pawn he had used to steal my child and access my family wealth. And the moment she ceased to be useful, he was planning to lock her in a padded cell and throw away the key. He used me. Courtney choked out her tears, dripping onto her designer shoes. He used the fake drug charges to destroy you. He used my inheritance to build his empire, and now he wants to lock me away. Yes, I said, walking around my desk and standing over her. He manipulated William and Catherine into handing over the keys to the kingdom. They were so desperate to hide my supposed failures that they practically gift-wrapped you and Lily for a monster. Courtney looked up at me. Her makeup ruined, her eyes filled with absolute terror. "He will kill me, Amber. If he knows I have seen this, he will not wait for the doctors. He will kill me." "Not if you help me bury him first," I demanded, crouching down to her level. "I need inside access to his physical servers. The data I have is enough to put him away for financial fraud, but I need the raw, unencrypted hard drives from his campaign office to tie him directly to the federal racketeering charges. You have the spouse bypass codes. You are going to get me inside." Courtney wiped her face, her hands trembling violently. She looked at the monitors, then back at me. A spark of genuine hatred finally ignited in her eyes, replacing the decades of brainwashed obedience. "I will do it," she whispered fiercely. "I will give you everything. The passcodes, the security schedules, the hidden safe combinations. I want him to rot in federal prison." "Good," I said, standing up and pulling her to her feet. "My security chief is going to escort you to a secure safe house right now. We need to get you a burner phone and a clean vehicle. Do you have your keys?" Courtney patted her coat pocket, nodding. "My car is in the underground parking garage. Section D. Go straight to your car. My men will meet you there in exactly 2 minutes." I instructed, handing her a blank keycard to bypass the lobby. "Do not speak to anyone. Do not answer your phone." Courtney nodded, swallowing hard. She gripped the keycard, turned on her heel, and rushed out the glass doors of my office. I watched her leave, feeling a cold, calculated satisfaction. The family dynamic had permanently fractured. I immediately turned back to my terminal to initiate the server extraction protocol. I typed rapidly, coordinating with my tactical team. But I had underestimated Brandon's desperation. Down in the dimly lit concrete expanse of the underground parking garage, Courtney sprinted toward her luxury sedan. Her heels echoed loudly against the pavement. She reached her vehicle, her hand shaking as she pressed the unlock button on her key fob. The headlights flashed. Before she could reach the door handle, a massive black unmarked van aggressively accelerated from the shadows, tires screeching as it blocked her car entirely. The side panel door slid open with brutal force. Three heavily armored mercenaries wearing unmarked tactical gear leaped out. Courtney screamed, turning to run toward the elevator banks. She was not fast enough. One mercenary grabbed her by her hair, violently yanking her backward, while another clamped a heavy hand over her mouth, stifling her cries for help. They dragged her thrashing body across the pavement and threw her roughly into the back of the dark van. The doors slammed shut and the vehicle tore out of the garage, vanishing into the Chicago streets. The breach alarm howled through the executive suite. I stared at the live feed from the underground parking garage. The black van blew past the exit barriers into Chicago traffic with Courtney trapped inside. My security chief rushed over, radio in hand, to pursue. I held up my hand. Chasing a ghost van was a losing game. Brandon was a cornered animal acting on blind panic. He wanted leverage. My secure office phone rang. I answered it and put it on speaker. "I own every politician in this city," Brandon snarled, his voice vibrating with aggression. "Your sister is sitting in a van with a gun pointed at her head. You are going to wipe every file you decrypted from my phone. You are going to publicly apologize on television and claim you suffered a psychotic break. And you will let my extraction team walk out of your secondary data center with the physical servers." I did not gasp. I did not beg for my sister. I simply pulled up the schematic for my off-site data center on the main monitor. "You sent a tactical team to my server farm," I asked, my voice stripped of emotion. "They are already inside," Brandon gloated. "They bypassed your pathetic electronic locks 5 minutes ago. They are planting thermite charges on your server racks right now. Once those hard drives melt into slag, you have zero evidence of my financial records. No federal racketeering charges. No offshore accounts. Just the word of a crazy woman who lost her kid 13 years ago. Call off your guards, Amber. Or Courtney takes a bullet." He thought he was a criminal mastermind, outsmarting a helpless victim. He failed to realize he was dealing with a woman who built digital fortresses for the Department of Defense. I typed a rapid sequence of commands into my terminal. "I am not calling off my guards," I replied smoothly, "because there are no guards at that facility. It is entirely automated." I brought up the live surveillance feed of the data center sub-basement. 4 armed mercenaries dressed in tactical gear were moving swiftly between the towering rows of server racks. They were slapping magnetic incendiary explosives onto the metal casings, working under the assumption that they had hacked my perimeter defenses. They had not hacked anything. I had deliberately disabled the outer firewall defenses the exact moment I saw Courtney get taken. I lured them exactly where I wanted them. "You are bluffing," Brandon snapped over the phone. "My guys are professionals. They will burn your company to the ground." "Let us see about that," I said. I hit the enter key, activating a system I coded called the Aegis Protocol. On my surveillance monitors, the trap sprang shut with terrifying efficiency. The mercenaries froze as the overhead lights switched from harsh white to a pulsing, aggressive crimson. Massive titanium blast doors dropped from the ceiling, slamming into the concrete floor with a force that shook the camera feeds. The extraction team scrambled toward the exit, but they were entirely enclosed inside a transparent, bulletproof glass vault. One of the panicked mercenaries raised his heavy automatic rifle and fired a continuous burst of gunfire directly at the glass barrier. The heavy caliber bullets sparked and flattened against the reinforced surface, doing absolutely no damage. They were trapped inside a highly pressurized cage designed to withstand a bomb blast. Then, the automated fire suppression system engaged. Instead of water, the ceiling vents began pumping a rapid expansion halon gas replacement into the sealed vault. It was a localized oxygen depletion system designed to extinguish server fires without damaging the hardware. It was incredibly effective at neutralizing human threats. "What the hell did you just do?" Brandon demanded, his voice pitching higher as he received panicked radio transmissions from his newly trapped tactical team. "I took away your leverage," I answered coldly. I tapped another key, initiating a reverse video call directly to Brandon's personal device. His face popped up on my secondary monitor. He was sitting in the back of a luxury town car, sweating profusely, his eyes wide with shock as he stared at the live feed I was broadcasting to his screen. He watched his expensive hit squad coughing, dropping their weapons, and collapsing to their knees as the oxygen levels in the vault were mechanically lowered to just above the threshold of unconsciousness. "They are not going to melt my servers, Brandon," I told him, watching his arrogant facade shatter completely. "They are going to pass out in about 40 seconds. When the federal agents arrive to collect them, those men are going to trade a reduced sentence for full immunity by testifying exactly who hired them to commit domestic terrorism. You do not have my data. You do not have a way out. And if you even think about hurting Courtney, I will lower the oxygen in that vault by 2% more and leave them there to suffocate." Brandon stared at the screen, his chest heaving. The illusion of his power was gone. He was a fraud, a coward who relied on bribed officials and hired guns to do his dirty work. Now, stripped of his resources, the cornered rat showed his true nature. "If I am going down, I am taking everyone with me," Brandon screamed into the camera, spittle flying from his lips. He slammed his laptop open on the car seat beside him. On my financial tracking monitor, I watched him access the offshore banking portals he managed for my parents. With rapid manic keystrokes, Brandon executed a total asset liquidation. He completely drained William and Catherine massive retirement funds, their lucrative investment portfolios, and their hidden trust accounts, transferring every single dollar into a completely untraceable offshore cryptocurrency wallet. He immediately sent me a clear screenshot of my parents' bank balances hitting absolute zero. "They are absolutely nothing to me now," Brandon sneered, completely abandoning the family that had worshipped him blindly. "Let them starve in the freezing cold streets." The mahogany-paneled walls of the most exclusive steakhouse in Chicago offered William and Catherine a perfect bubble of arrogant tranquility. Oblivious to the complete destruction of Brandon's criminal empire unfolding across the city, my parents were busy enjoying a 6-course tasting menu. Catherine swirled her imported red wine, complaining loudly to a passing waiter about the temperature of her truffled lobster tail. William laughed, waving his solid gold money clip in the air to signal for the check. They were celebrating another successful quarter of maintaining their flawless manufactured high society image. The waiter approached their table with a leather folio, bowing his head respectfully as William dropped his premier black credit card onto the silver tray. My father did not even look at the total. He simply went back to discussing the upcoming country club renovations with my mother. 5 minutes later, the restaurant manager appeared. He did not look respectful. He looked deeply uncomfortable. He leaned down, shielding his mouth with his hand to keep his voice low. "I am terribly sorry, sir," the manager whispered, placing the black card back on the table. "Your financial institution has declined the transaction." William scoffed, his face instantly flushing red with indignant rage. "Do you know who I am?" he snapped, his voice carrying to the neighboring tables. "Run it again. Your machine is clearly broken. That account holds over $5 million in liquid capital alone." The manager did not flinch. "We ran it 3 times, sir. I also took the liberty of running the secondary platinum card your wife provided to the hostess earlier. Both accounts are returning an absolute zero balance code. The system indicates the accounts have been permanently closed." Catherine gasped, her hand flying to her chest. She snatched her phone from her designer handbag and aggressively tapped the screen to open their offshore banking portal. The loading circle spun for 3 agonizing seconds. When the dashboard finally illuminated, Catherine let out a strangled, breathless shriek. Every single account was completely drained. The high-yield retirement funds, the hidden trust accounts, the offshore emergency reserves, all of it displayed a devastating sequence of zeros. A single glaring notification showed a massive, irreversible outbound wire transfer to an anonymous, untraceable cryptocurrency wallet executed just 20 minutes prior. "Call Brandon right now," William demanded, his hands shaking violently as he abandoned the unpaid bill and rushed toward the exit. "He handles our wealth management. There has been a massive bank error. We need him to reverse this immediately." Catherine dialed his number frantically as they stumbled out onto the freezing Chicago pavement. It went straight to voicemail. She dialed again. Voicemail. Panic, raw and suffocating, finally set in. They flagged down a passing taxi, promising the driver a massive cash tip they no longer possessed, and ordered him to speed directly to Brandon's downtown real estate development headquarters. They burst through the glass doors of the towering commercial building, ignoring the lobby receptionist as they sprinted toward the private executive elevator. When the doors slid open on the top floor, they were met with absolute chaos. Interns were running down the hallways. Paper shredders were whirring at maximum capacity. Brandon was standing behind his massive desk, frantically stuffing stacks of bearer bonds and foreign passports into a black duffel bag. Brandon William yelled, charging into the office. "Our accounts are completely empty. The bank says a total liquidation was triggered using your executive override authorization. Fix this right now. We have zero access to our funds." Brandon did not look up from his duffel bag. He zipped it shut with a sharp, aggressive yank and finally turned to face them. His perfectly groomed political facade was completely gone, replaced by the cornered, venomous animal he truly was. "I am not fixing anything," William Brandon sneered, grabbing his coat. "I triggered the liquidation. The federal government is moving in to freeze my assets because of your psychotic daughter. I needed untraceable capital to get out of the country. I took your money because you are entirely useless to me now." Catherine stumbled backward, clutching the doorframe to keep from collapsing. "You stole our life savings," she cried out, her voice cracking with sheer terror. "We protected you. We testified for you. We gave you our granddaughter. You promised us financial security forever." "I bought you," Brandon corrected coldly, stepping around his desk. "And now your lease has expired. You are nothing but collateral damage." William lunged forward, grabbing Brandon by the collar of his expensive suit. "You are not leaving with our money, you arrogant thief. I will call the police. I will tell them everything about the campaign bribes." Brandon laughed right in my father's face. He casually raised two fingers in the air. Four massive private security contractors stepped out from the shadows of the executive suite. They grabbed William by his shoulders, twisting his arms violently behind his back. Two other guards seized Catherine, ignoring her terrified screams. "Throw them out on the street!" Brandon commanded, not looking back as he headed toward the private helipad access doors. "Make sure they do not take a single piece of property from this building." The guards dragged my parents fighting and kicking into the elevator. They rode down to the ground floor in complete silence. The moment the lobby doors opened, the guards physically hurled William and Catherine out of the building. They crashed hard onto the concrete sidewalk. William tore the knees of his expensive trousers. Catherine scraped her palms, her designer handbag tumbling into the dirty street gutter. The glass doors of the high-rise locked firmly behind them. They were destitute, humiliated, and utterly alone. Desperation is a powerful motivator. Stripped of their wealth, their social status, and their golden boy, they had only one place left to turn. They walked for 2 miles through the freezing wind because their rideshare applications declined their negative cards. They finally arrived at the secure lobby of my luxury penthouse building in the financial district. They begged the concierge to call up to my residence, weeping hysterically about a family emergency. I did not deny them entry. I authorized the elevator to bring them up to my floor. When the steel doors slid open, they practically crawled out into my private foyer. I stood waiting for them, flanked by my own heavily armed security detail. I wore a tailored black suit, my posture absolutely rigid. William and Catherine dropped to their knees the second they saw me. The arrogance they had displayed at the gala just 24 hours ago was completely obliterated. "Amber, please!" Catherine sobbed, crawling forward and reaching out to touch my shoes. "You have to help us. Brandon took everything. He robbed us blind. He is a monster. We did not know. We swear we did not know what he was doing." William wept openly, his hands shaking as he looked up at me. "We were manipulated, Amber. He brainwashed us into believing you were dangerous. He tricked us into supporting him. We are your parents. You have to protect us. We have no money. We have nowhere to go. Please forgive us." I stared down at them with absolute freezing indifference. I did not flinch. I did not offer my hand. I reached into the interior pocket of my blazer and pulled out a single neatly folded sheet of paper. I crouched down so I was exactly at eye level with their tear-stained faces. I unfolded the document and pressed it flat against the marble floor right in front of William's trembling hands. It was a highly classified banking receipt I had extracted from Brandon's encrypted servers. This is a wire transfer receipt from 13 years ago, I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the grand foyer. It details a payment of $250,000 sent to a shell corporation owned by the family court judge who presided over my custody hearing. The exact judge who allowed Brandon to use fake drug charges to take Lily away from me. William stared at the paper, the blood draining completely from his face as he recognized the origin account number printed clearly at the top of the page. I leaned in closer, ensuring my words cut through their pathetic excuses like a scalpel. I traced the routing number on the paper with my index finger. The money did not come from Brandon's accounts, I whispered, my voice dripping with pure venom. It came directly from your personal retirement fund, William. You did not just sit back and watch him steal my daughter, you bought her for him. William and Catherine stared at the wire transfer receipt on the marble floor of my penthouse foyer, the color completely drained from their faces as the reality of their irreversible ruin settled in. They had no money, no social standing, and no golden son-in-law to protect them. I did not give them a single second of sympathy. I signaled my private security detail with a sharp wave of my hand. My guards hauled my weeping, hyperventilating parents off the floor and dragged them toward the service elevator. I turned my back on them without another word. I had a daughter to win back. 2 hours later, the heavy oak doors of the Cook County Family Court swung open. The emergency custody hearing was officially convened to determine the immediate fate of Lily. The courtroom was stifling thick with tension and the suffocating arrogance of the man sitting at the respondent table. Brandon had arrived looking like the ultimate polished victim. He wore a conservative navy suit, his hair perfectly combed, his posture slumped just enough to project the image of a heartbroken, terrified father trying to protect his family from a monster. His high-priced defense attorney, a slick, overpaid shark named Kensington, immediately took the floor. Kensington did not waste a single second. He launched a vicious, calculated attack directly at my character. Your Honor, Kensington began pacing confidently in front of the judge bench. We are not dealing with a stable, fit mother today. We are dealing with a woman who has a documented violent history of severe substance abuse. 13 years ago, this very court rightfully stripped Amber of her custody after police found bags of illegal narcotics hidden mere inches from her infant daughter's crib. Now she has acquired dangerous corporate wealth and is using her cybersecurity firm to harass stock and terrorize my client. Brandon has provided a loving, secure home for Lily for over a decade. Amber is a dangerous, delusional addict trying to buy her way out of a filthy past. Brandon dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief, playing his part flawlessly. He looked at the judge with a pathetic, pleading expression. I sat completely still at the petitioner table. I did not flinch. I did not glare. I simply looked at Simone. My sister-in-law stood up. Simone had been fully reinstated at her corporate law firm that very morning, completely cleared of Brandon's pathetic embezzlement framing attempt. She was wearing a razor-sharp crimson power suit, her natural hair styled impeccably, her posture radiating absolute lethal authority. She was out for blood and she held a thick encrypted digital tablet in her hand. Simone did not argue family law. She bypassed the standard custody playbook entirely. Your Honor, Simone stated, her voice ringing through the quiet courtroom with terrifying clarity. Opposing counsel relies on a 13-year-old drug conviction to paint my client as an unfit mother. But what opposing counsel conveniently omits is that those narcotics were planted, and we possess the forensic cyber evidence to prove exactly who planted them. Kensington laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. Objection, Your Honor. This is a custody hearing, not a venue for ridiculous conspiracy theories and relitigating decades-old settled criminal matters. I will allow it for now. Counselor, the judge replied, though his tone was noticeably strained. Proceed, but make it quick. Simone tapped the screen of her tablet, sending a massive file directly to the courtroom display monitors. Complex data logs, encrypted messaging transcripts, and banking wire transfers illuminated the screens. 13 years ago, the police seized a very specific chemical batch of narcotics from my client's apartment, Simone explained, pacing smoothly toward the witness stand. The police report noted the unique chemical signature of those drugs, which belonged to a highly monitored distribution cartel operating out of the South Side. Until yesterday, the buyer of those drugs remained anonymous. But my client company, Zenith Cyber Defense, recently decrypted the hidden mobile device of the respondent, Brandon. Brandon's posture immediately stiffened. The fake tears vanished from his eyes, replaced by a sudden rigid panic. We cross-referenced the deleted dark web transaction logs from Brandon Old College, alias with the cartel distribution database. Simone continued, her voice slicing through the room like a blade. We have the exact digital receipt, the IP address, and the cryptocurrency transfer, proving that Brandon purchased that exact batch of narcotics 48 hours before he called the police to raid Amber's apartment. He bought the drugs. He planted the drugs. He committed perjury to steal a child and gain access to a family trust fund. The courtroom erupted into frantic murmurs. Kensington scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with panicked rage. Objection. This evidence is unlawfully obtained. It is highly prejudicial, unverified, and completely outside the scope of this family court proceeding. You cannot introduce cyber espionage into a custody dispute. The presiding judge, a gray-haired man named Judge Montgomery, began banging his heavy wooden gavel aggressively against his sound block. Order. I will have order in this courtroom. He glared down at Simone, his face shining with an unnatural sheen of sweat. Counselor Judge Montgomery barked, his voice shaking slightly. I am striking this entire presentation from the record. This evidence is highly irregular, entirely inadmissible, and borders on federal espionage. This court will not entertain fabricated digital documents designed to smear a respected real estate developer. I am dismissing this evidence, and I am preparing to rule in favor of the respondent to maintain the child's current stable living environment. Brandon let out a slow, shaky breath of relief, a triumphant smirk creeping back onto his face. He thought his money had saved him again. He thought he owned the room. I stood up. I did not ask for permission to speak. I did not consult my attorney. I tapped the face of my smartwatch twice. I bypassed the courthouse localized security firewall in exactly 3 seconds, syncing my device directly to the courtroom integrated public address system. If the court refuses to accept digital evidence of the past, I announced, my voice cut through the stifling air, perhaps the court will accept digital evidence from exactly 48 hours ago. I hit play on my smartwatch. The audio blasted through the high-definition speakers mounted on the courtroom walls. The sound quality was crystal clear. It was the undeniable, unmistakable voice of Brandon speaking to another man. I need Amber permanently locked out of that custody hearing. Brandon's recorded voice echoed off the wood-paneled walls. I need you to strike whatever evidence her lawyers bring in. Then came the second voice. It was the voice of the man sitting right in front of me, Judge Montgomery. It is going to cost you heavily this time. Brandon, the judge recorded voice, replied smoothly over the speakers. The federal heat is getting intense. I want $500,000 wired to my offshore account by midnight, or I recuse myself and you take your chances with a magistrate you do not own. Consider it done, Brandon's voice answered. Just make sure Amber leaves that courthouse without her kid. I stopped the recording. The deafening silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. I stared directly into the eyes of the corrupt judge, watching his entire career, his freedom and his life, shatter into a million unfixable pieces. Judge Montgomery dropped his wooden gavel. It hit the floor with a hollow thud that echoed across the paralyzed courtroom. The color completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He opened his mouth to issue a command, to cite me for contempt, to do absolutely anything, to salvage his destroyed career, but no words came out. The sheer weight of his corruption had just crushed him in front of a packed gallery. Before his bailiff could even step toward me, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with earth-shattering force. A dozen heavily armed federal agents marched down the center aisle. Their tactical vests bore the bold, unmistakable gold lettering of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They bypassed the gallery, bypassed the security checkpoints, and marched straight toward the bench. My anonymous data drops had worked perfectly. I had not just leaked Brandon's financial ledgers to the press. I had fed raw decrypted server logs directly to the Federal Racketeering Task Force for the past 72 hours. They had been building a massive criminal conspiracy case, waiting for the final piece of the puzzle to drop. I had just handed it to them on a silver platter. Judge Montgomery, you are under arrest for federal racketeering, wire fraud, and accepting bribes, the lead agent announced, his voice booming with absolute authority. Step down from the bench and place your hands behind your back. The courtroom erupted into total chaos. Reporters who had sneaked into the gallery started shouting questions. Spectators gasped and scrambled out of their wooden pews. Uniformed court officers stood frozen, unsure whether to protect their judge or assist the federal agents. The lead agent did not wait for compliance. He marched right up the wooden steps, grabbed the corrupt judge by the shoulder of his black robe, and yanked him down. The sharp click of heavy steel handcuffs locking around the magistrate wrists rang out like a victory bell. At the respondent table, Brandon realized his impenetrable fortress of wealth and political influence had just burned to the ground. His high-priced defense attorney took one look at the federal agent swarming the bench, grabbed his expensive leather briefcase, and physically backed away from his own client. The lawyer was instantly abandoning ship, refusing to be caught in the blast radius of a federal conspiracy charge. Brandon's eyes darted frantically around the room. The marshals and agents were entirely focused on securing the disgraced judge and locking down the immediate perimeter around the bench. Brandon saw his singular fleeting window of opportunity. He shoved his chair backward, sending it crashing to the floor. He bolted. He threw his own attorney aside, vaulted over the low wooden gate separating the gallery from the court well, and sprinted violently toward the side emergency exit door. "Hi is running," Simona shouted, pointing directly at the fleeing coward. Two court officers lunged forward, but Brandon shoved a heavy wooden bench directly into their path, sending them tumbling to the ground. He hit the emergency push bar on the side door and vanished into the fire stairwell before the federal agents could pivot their attention away from the arrested judge. "Let the tactical units hunt him down," Simone told me, grabbing my shoulder and pulling my focus back to the immediate battle. "We have exactly one window to get your daughter back before this entire building gets locked down as a federal crime scene." A supervising federal magistrate, who had been coordinating with the FBI task force behind the scenes, stepped forward from the judge chambers to take control of the jurisdiction nightmare. Simone did not hesitate for a single second. She marched right up to the newly appointed magistrate, slapping a freshly printed expedited custody petition onto the clerk desk. "Your Honor," Simone demanded, her voice slicing through the ongoing chaos of the arrest. The previous custody order removing Lily from her biological mother was the direct result of a documented criminal conspiracy. You just watched the presiding judge get hauled out in handcuffs for accepting a bribe to uphold that fraudulent ruling. The state has no legal standing to keep my client child in protective services. We are filing an emergency petition for the immediate, unconditional restoration of Amber full legal and physical custody. The federal magistrate reviewed the digital logs I had projected on the screens, then looked at the handcuffed judge being dragged out the main doors. He pulled a pen from his pocket and signed the bottom of Simone's petition with a swift, definitive stroke. He handed the document directly to me. "Go get your daughter," the magistrate ordered firmly. I held the piece of paper in my trembling hands. 13 years. 13 years of agonizing, suffocating grief. 13 years of building a corporate empire just to possess enough power to crush the monsters who stole my baby. I finally had her back. "We need to move now," I told Simone, securing the court order in my jacket pocket. We sprint out of the courthouse, bypassing the swarming news crews and flashing police lights. My private security detail had the armored SUV waiting at the curb with the engine roaring. We jumped into the back seat and I slammed my fist against the partition. "Drive," I commanded my security chief. "Get us to the Child Protective Services transport facility right now. Run every red light in the city if you have to." The heavy vehicle tore through the downtown Chicago streets. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. I pictured Lily's face. I pictured pulling her into my arms, telling her she was finally safe, and promising her that nobody would ever lay a hand on her again. We navigated the tight turns of the industrial district, approaching the secure state facility where Lily had been temporarily housed. But as my SUV rounded the final corner, the surge of triumphant adrenaline instantly evaporated, replaced by a freezing, paralyzing terror. The heavy steel perimeter gates of the state facility had been violently rammed open. Thick black smoke billowed into the afternoon sky from a burning security kiosk. 4 local police cruisers were parked haphazardly across the lawn, their sirens wailing uselessly into the cold air. "Stop the car," I yelled, unbuckling my seatbelt before we even came to a complete halt. I threw the heavy door open and sprinted onto the pavement. My security team poured out behind me with their weapons drawn, but there was no one left to fight. Sitting in the center of the shattered courtyard was a white state transport van. It had been aggressively run off the road, its front axle crushed against a concrete barricade. The side sliding doors were ripped completely off their hinges. I ran frantically toward the wreckage, my boots crunching over shattered safety glass. A state social worker was sitting on the asphalt, pressing a bloody cloth against a deep gash on her forehead. "Where is my daughter?" I screamed, dropping to my knees beside the injured woman. "Where is Lily?" The social worker looked up at me, her eyes wide with absolute horror. Her hands were shaking violently as she pointed toward the empty, ruined back seat of the transport van. "He ran at us," the woman gasped, coughing violently as she struggled to speak. "A black truck hit us. He had a gun. He back seat, kicking and screaming. He took her." Brandon had gone completely rogue. He knew his political empire was dead. He knew his stolen wealth was gone. He knew he was facing decades in a federal penitentiary. He had absolutely nothing left to lose, and he had just taken the only thing in this world that mattered to me. The heavy metal doors of the Child Protective Services facility were a mangled wreck behind us as my armored SUV tore away from the curb. I left the bleeding social worker with the arriving paramedics and sprinted back to my vehicle. There was no time for panic. Panic was a luxury for people who did not hold the digital keys to the city. I threw myself into the back seat, my security chief slamming the door shut behind me before the driver hit the gas. I ripped my laptop open, my fingers flying across the keys with absolute lethal precision. I bypassed the standard municipal protocols and directly accessed the Zenith Cyber Defense Orbital Surveillance Network. "Patch me into the city grid," I commanded my technical director over the secure comms line. "I want every traffic camera, toll booth scanner, and private security feed in a 50-mile radius routing straight to my dashboard. Activate the facial recognition architecture. Flag any vehicle matching a damaged black truck." My monitors exploded with hundreds of live feeds. The artificial intelligence scrubbed through terabytes of visual data in real time. We were not looking for a license plate. A desperate criminal would have swapped the plates minutes after the collision. We were looking for the exact impact trajectory and dent pattern on the front grille of a heavy-duty black truck. The algorithm locked onto a match in exactly 42 seconds. A dark vehicle speeding recklessly down the interstate, violently weaving through afternoon traffic. My secure burner phone vibrated aggressively on the leather console. The caller ID was blocked, routed through a dozen ghost servers. I knew exactly who it was. I muted the vehicle cabin, signaling my security chief to initiate the hard trace protocol. I needed him to stay on the line for exactly 90 seconds to triangulate his precise geolocation. I hit the answer button, my face a mask of absolute stone. "You destroyed my life!" Brandon screamed into the receiver. His voice was ragged, completely stripped of the polished political arrogance he had flaunted at the gala just last night. The background noise was chaotic. I could hear the roar of the truck engine and the muffled, terrified sobbing of my sister Courtney in the back seat. "You destroyed your own life, Brandon," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I simply expedited the paperwork." "Listen to me, you psychotic failure!" He snarled, his breath hitting the microphone heavily. "I have your precious daughter. I have your pathetic sister. My men snatched Courtney right out of your parking garage, and I just ripped Lily out of the hands of the state. You thought you could bankrupt me. You thought you could lock me in a federal cell. But I am the one holding all the cards." I watched the trace program on my screen, bouncing from a cell tower in the financial district to a relay station on the west side. He was using a military-grade encryption scrambler, but he failed to realize my company held the defense contracts that manufactured his scrambling software. We were cutting through his digital armor layer by layer. I just needed to keep him talking. "What do you want, Brandon?" I asked, leaning back against the leather seat. "You are a wanted fugitive. The FBI is hunting you. The local police know you threw a judge under the bus. William and Catherine are completely broke and wandering the streets. You have no allies. You have no safe haven. I want $50 million, he demanded, slamming his fist against his steering wheel. 50 million untraceable dollars wired into a ghost cryptocurrency wallet by the time I reach my destination. If the money is not there, I will put a bullet in Courtney's head, and you will never see Lily again. Do not test me, Amber. I have nothing left to lose. 50 million is a heavy lift for a dead man, I countered, keeping my tone perfectly level to provoke his fragile ego. How exactly do you plan to spend it? Your passport is flagged. Your face is plastered across every national news network. You cannot even buy a cup of coffee without triggering a federal alert. Just transfer the money, he roared, his voice cracking with manic desperation. You have the capital. You bought my foreclosure. You stole my political funds. Send the crypto transfer right now, or I swear to God I will end them both. I typed rapidly, pretending to access my offshore liquidity accounts. I am initiating the transfer protocol, I lied smoothly. The blockchain verification requires a manual override. It is going to take a minute to clear the authentication nodes. Keep your eyes on the road, Brandon. It would be a tragedy if you crashed before you got your payout. The trace program on my screen hit 80%, 85, 90. He was driving erratically, but the trajectory was no longer matching a frantic escape toward the state lines or the international airport. He was circling back. Do not play games with me, he hissed. I know you are trying to trace this call. I am running this through a decentralized network. You are never going to find me. You are just a college dropout who got lucky. I am the one who built this family. I am the one who won. The trace hit 100%. A bright red crosshair locked onto the digital map on my secondary monitor. I stared at the precise geographical coordinates, a cold, calculated realization washing over me. You did not win anything, I said softly. I terminated the call. I did not need to hear another word. I turned my laptop screen toward my security chief, who was already gripping his tactical rifle. Brandon was not fleeing the jurisdiction. He was not heading for a private airstrip or a hidden dock. The coward was retreating to the only place he felt invincible. He is heading to his secondary property in the northern suburbs, I instructed, my voice hard as steel, the ultra-modern smart home he built, using Courtney inheritance. It is a heavily fortified safe house rigged with bulletproof glass, reinforced steel doors, and an underground panic room. He thinks he can barricade himself inside and negotiate a standoff. My security chief tapped his earpiece, relaying the coordinates to our trailing tactical units. We are 5 minutes out. If he locks down inside that panic room, we will need heavy explosives to breach the outer shell. We will not need explosives, I replied, closing my laptop and drawing a specialized decryption tablet from my tactical bag. He built that smart home using the absolute best automated security money could buy. But he forgot one critical detail. My firm coded the core operating system for his security vendor. I do not need to blow the doors off the hinges. I am going to turn his impenetrable fortress into a steel coffin. My armored SUV skidded to a violent halt on the sprawling concrete driveway of Brandon isolated suburban estate. The property was a modern architectural monstrosity, built entirely of dark steel and reinforced glass. It sat on 10 acres of cleared land devoid of cover. As we threw our doors open, the massive steel blast shutters slammed down over every window and exterior door. The house recognized an unauthorized perimeter breach and automatically shifted into full lockdown mode. My security chief raised his tactical rifle, scanning the dark roofline for automated turrets. We beat the local authorities here, I announced, stepping out into the freezing Chicago wind. Law enforcement response teams are at least 8 minutes away from this location. A sharp electronic static cracked through the external intercom speakers mounted on the stone pillars of the front porch. Brandon's voice echoed across the empty driveway, thick with arrogant desperation. You are too late, Amber, the intercom blared. I am locked inside the subterranean panic room. The walls are 3 feet of poured concrete laced with titanium rebar. You cannot break in. I have Courtney and Lily down here with me. I also have a loaded weapon pointed directly at your sister chest right now. I heard Courtney let out a muffled, terrified sob in the background. Lily's voice cried out, begging him to stop. My blood turned to absolute ice, but my hands remained perfectly steady. I did not yell back at the speaker. I did not show him an ounce of the agonizing fear tearing through my chest. I slammed my heavy military-grade laptop directly onto the hood of my SUV. I plugged a hardline decryptor cable into the side port and synced it to my mobile satellite uplink. "You have exactly 60 seconds to complete the $50 million crypto transfer," Brandon shrieked. "If I do not see the code, I will shoot Courtney. Then I am taking Lily and walking out the emergency tunnel. Send the money right now." My chief gripped his rifle. "Do we breach?" he asked urgently. "We can blow the ventilation shaft." "No," I commanded, staring at my laptop. "Thermite will trigger the internal fire suppression system and choke them all with halon gas. We are not negotiating, and we are not blowing the doors. I am going to gut this house from the inside out." I typed with blinding speed, launching a proprietary software program I had personally designed 5 years ago. Brandon thought he was untouchable because he spent $500,000 outfitting this estate with Apex Citadel security mainframes. It was the premier automated defense system for billionaires and paranoid politicians. What Brandon did not know was that the Department of Defense had hired Zenith Cyber Defense to run a vulnerability audit on Apex Citadel firmware before approving it for government contractors. During that audit, I discovered a critical flaw in their core operating kernel. I did not report the flaw. I wrote a zero-day exploit, a hidden digital backdoor, and buried it deep inside the manufacturer firmware updates. Every Apex system in the world carried my invisible footprint. "You have 30 seconds, Amber," Brandon screamed over the intercom. "The money or your sister dies. Do not test me." I ignored his pathetic countdown. My fingers flew across the keyboard, injecting malicious code directly into the smart home local intranet. The progress bar on my screen jumped from 20% to 70%. I was bypassing the biometric firewalls, slicing through the encrypted defense layers like a scalpel. "I am not sending you a single dime." "Brandon," I said, my voice projecting clearly through my vehicle external loudspeaker. "You do not have an emergency escape tunnel. You do not have leverage. You just locked yourself inside a steel cage and handed me the remote control." 10 seconds, Amber," he roared, the sound of a gun slide racking, echoing terrifyingly through the speakers. "Send the money." The progress bar on my monitor hit 100%. The screen flashed bright green, granting me absolute root access to the entire estate. I owned the house. I hit the enter key. Every exterior floodlight on the massive property instantly went black, plunging the estate into total darkness. The electronic locking mechanisms on the reinforced front doors disengaged with a heavy mechanical clunk, but I did not order my men to enter. I kept them stationed by the vehicles. I was not sending my team into a blind firefight with a cornered madman holding my daughter hostage. "What did you just do?" Brandon panicked. Voice crackled over the intercom. "The lights just went out down here. The control panels are locked." "I hijacked your master terminal," I replied, tapping new commands into my console. "You wanted to hide in a bunker. Now you are going to die in one." I accessed the environmental controls for the subterranean panic room. With a single keystroke, I completely severed the fresh air ventilation system feeding into his underground vault. The heavy steel baffles slammed shut, cutting off their oxygen supply from the outside world. Next, I overrode the climate controls. I dragged the digital thermostat slider down to its absolute minimum setting. The industrial air conditioning units surrounding the panic room kicked into maximum overdrive, pumping freezing air into the sealed concrete chamber. "Turn the power back on," Brandon demanded, as the freezing air began to bite. "You are going to freeze your own kid." "Lily and Courtney are wearing heavy winter coats," I stated, staring at the thermal feed. "You are wearing a thin shirt. They will survive. You will go into hypothermic shock." Finally, I activated the acoustic deterrent system, routing it exclusively through the speakers mounted inside the panic room. I pushed the decibel level to maximum capacity. A deafening high-pitched siren erupted, designed to cause immediate severe equilibrium loss and blinding physical pain. Brandon shrieked, dropping his weapon, clapping his hands over his bleeding ears. The acoustic deterrent system screamed at a frequency designed to shatter human equilibrium. Through the thermal imaging feed on my laptop, I watched the temperature plunge. The digital readout hit 40 degrees and was still dropping rapidly. White frost began to form on the edges of the high-definition security cameras mounted in the corners of the vault. Brandon was on his knees, clamping his hands over his ears, screaming soundlessly against the deafening alarm. Lily curled into a tight ball on the floor, shivering violently. Courtney crouched over her, trying to shield my daughter with her own body. For 13 years, Courtney had played the role of the perfect, compliant political wife, turning a blind eye to the monster she married. But sitting in that freezing steel cage, watching her savior prepare to let them die, her delusion was ripped away completely. Brandon staggered to his feet, his face twisted in absolute feral panic. The freezing air was rapidly stealing the oxygen from his lungs. He realized the digital locks were completely unresponsive. His purchased power, his political connections, his stolen wealth, none of it mattered inside a concrete box stripped of air and heat. He reached down and grabbed the tactical handgun he had dropped on the floor. I watched him aim the weapon directly at the main electronic control panel, mounted next to the reinforced steel door. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot was muffled by the blaring siren, but the impact shattered the glass and plastic casing of the terminal. He fired again, emptying the magazine into the wiring, hoping to short-circuit the locking mechanism and force the doors open. It was a pathetic, useless gesture. I had completely isolated the local circuitry from the main framework. Destroying the physical keypad did absolutely nothing to the magnetic seals controlled by my remote server. The steel doors remained firmly shut. Realizing his brute force tactic had failed, Brandon spun around. The thermal camera caught the exact moment his panic morphed into homicidal rage. He raised the gun, pointing the barrel directly at Courtney. I could read his lips through the high-definition feed. He blamed her for his collapsing empire because she was the closest target for his shattered ego. I placed my finger over the enter key on my laptop, preparing to vent the halon gas directly into the room to knock him unconscious before he could pull the trigger. But I did not have to press it. Courtney finally found her courage. She looked at the weapon pointed at her chest. She looked at the terrified 14-year-old girl shivering beneath her. All the lies she had swallowed to maintain her luxury lifestyle evaporated in the freezing air of the panic room. She saw Brandon not as a wealthy benefactor, but as the ruthless, violent parasite he had always been. As Brandon stepped forward, raising his arm to strike her with the grip of the pistol, Courtney lunged. She did not cower this time. She reached out and grabbed the heavy industrial red fire extinguisher mounted on the concrete wall directly behind her. Brandon swung the gun down, but Courtney pivoted hard, throwing her entire body weight into the momentum. She swung the heavy steel cylinder in a brutal, sweeping arc. The solid metal base of the extinguisher connected squarely with the side of Brandon's skull with devastating force. The impact sent a shockwave through his body. Brandon's eyes immediately rolled back in his head. The gun slipped from his fingers, clattering uselessly against the concrete floor. His knees buckled instantly, and he collapsed in a heavy, lifeless heap, his face smashing against the freezing ground. Courtney did not hesitate to see if he was breathing. She dropped the extinguisher, grabbed Lily by her injured arm, and hauled my daughter to her feet. Courtney dragged Lily toward the heavy steel blast door, separating the inner vault from the outer antechamber. She pounded her fists against the unyielding metal, looking directly up at the security camera mounted above the doorframe. She knew I was watching. She was begging me to let them out. I hit the manual override command on my keyboard. A heavy hydraulic hiss echoed through the exterior speakers as the thick titanium locking bolts slid back into the walls. The reinforced door swung open just enough to let them squeeze through. Courtney shoved Lily into the narrow antechamber and scrambled in right behind her. The second their feet cleared the threshold, I slammed my hand down on the enter key. The heavy steel door violently slammed shut behind them, locking with a definitive magnetic slam. Brandon was sealed back inside the inner vault, completely alone. My tactical team was already moving. They breached the secondary garage entrance, sweeping the corridor with their weapons raised until they reached the exterior antechamber door. I disabled the final outer lock. My security chief pulled the heavy door open, rushing inside and grabbing Lily. He hoisted my shivering daughter into his arms, carrying her out of the freezing corridor and up the stairs toward the front driveway. Courtney followed closely behind her breath, coming in ragged gasps, her designer coat torn and stained with dust. I stepped away from my armored SUV and ran toward the front porch. The freezing Chicago wind whipped against my face, but I did not feel the cold. My security chief emerged from the shattered front doors, setting Lily gently on her feet. She looked up. Her tear-stained face was pale, her lips trembling from the freezing temperature of the vault. She saw me standing there, the woman who had fought through hell, corruption, and 13 years of agonizing grief to get her back. Lily did not hesitate. She ran across the concrete driveway and threw her arms around my waist, burying her face into my coat, sobbing uncontrollably. I dropped to my knees on the cold pavement, wrapping my arms around my daughter, burying my face in her hair. I held her so tightly, I thought my own ribs might crack. Courtney stood a few feet away, wrapping her arms around herself, watching us reunite. She looked completely broken, stripped of her arrogance and fake family, left with nothing but the reality of her own complicity. I did not offer her a word of comfort. She had earned her devastation. I slowly stood up, keeping one arm wrapped firmly around Lily's shoulders. I walked back to the hood of my SUV and looked at the glowing screen of my laptop. Inside the inner vault, Brandon was beginning to stir. The blow to his head had knocked him out, but the freezing temperatures were bringing him back to painful consciousness. He groaned, pushing himself up off the concrete floor, clutching the side of his bleeding head. He looked around the empty room, realizing Courtney and Lily were gone. He staggered toward the heavy steel door, pounding his fists against the unyielding metal, screaming soundlessly into the camera. I sat there watching him through the live feed. The ambient temperature in the vault was now hovering just above freezing. The oxygen levels were steadily dropping as the system continued to suppress the air circulation. I was trapped in a cage of his own making, suffocating slowly under the weight of his own absolute destruction. I did not smile. I did not gloat either. I just stared at the screen, letting him feel the exact same helpless, suffocating terror he had inflicted on me 13 years ago. Brandon's face on the thermal monitor turned a violent shade of blue. He clawed at his own throat, gasping soundlessly like a fish thrown onto dry land. His knees buckled completely. He collapsed against the steel floor of the inner vault, his eyes rolling back. I kept my finger hovering over the enter key. 13 years of stolen birthdays. 13 years of manufactured drug charges. 13 years of my parents adoring the monster who bought my child. A dark, primal part of my mind wanted to leave the ventilation baffles sealed tight. I wanted him to expire in that freezing concrete box, but I was not a murderer. I was a mother. I slammed the enter key down. The hydraulic systems hissed loudly over the external audio feed. The heavy steel baffles cracked open, flooding the subterranean panic room with a massive rush of oxygen. Brandon convulsed on the floor, sucking in greedy, desperate lungfuls of freezing air. He was alive, but he was completely broken. A deafening roar shattered the suburban quiet. A fleet of black armored vehicles tore up the driveway, crushing the manicured hedges and surrounding my SUV. Heavily armed federal agents poured out of the transports, their tactical boots hitting the pavement with military precision. The FBI racketeering task force had arrived. Simone had guided them straight to my geolocation. The lead agent rushed toward my vehicle, signaling for his men to secure the perimeter. I stepped away from the hood of my car and handed him the digital access tablet. The biometric locks are disabled, I told him, my voice carrying over the chaotic thrum of a dozen idling engines. The outer antechamber is clear. Your target is locked inside the inner vault. He is unarmed and incapacitated. The tactical units did not waste a single second. They swarmed the shattered front doors of the estate, moving in perfect synchronization. I watched the live feed on my laptop as they descended into the basement. They breached the outer corridor, sweeping the area with assault rifles raised. The lead agent hit the manual release on the inner vault. The heavy steel doors slid open. 4 agents rushed inside, grabbing Brandon by his expensive suit jacket and slamming him violently against the freezing concrete wall. He was too weak from the oxygen deprivation to offer resistance. They twisted his arms behind his back, securing his wrists with heavy steel handcuffs. The sharp, definitive click of the restraints echoed through the audio feed. It was the sound of my absolute victory. They dragged him up the basement stairs. Brandon stumbled and choked his legs, giving out twice before the agents forcefully hauled him out the front doors and into the biting Chicago wind. He was a pathetic, gasping shell of the powerful real estate developer he pretended to be. The deafening chop of rotor blades filled the sky. 4 local news helicopters hovered aggressively over the estate, their massive spotlights cutting through the darkness and pinning Brandon in a blinding circle of harsh white light. The cameras captured every humiliating second. They captured the tears streaming down his face, the snot dripping from his nose, and the sheer terror in his eyes as the federal agents shoved him forcefully against the hood of a black transport vehicle. The entire city was watching his political empire burn to the ground on live television. I turned away from the spectacle of his arrest. My security chief was standing near the edge of the driveway, his large frame shielding 2 fragile figures from the freezing wind. Lily and Courtney. I walked slowly toward them, my heart hammering a frantic, agonizing rhythm against my ribs. I had dreamed of this exact moment for 4,745 nights. I had imagined 100 different scenarios, terrifying myself with the thought that she would reject me, that Brandon's poison had completely erased me from her mind. Lily looked up. Her delicate face was pale, streaked with tears and dirt from the basement, but her eyes held a fierce, undeniable recognition. She did not hesitate. She broke away from my security chief and ran across the frozen pavement. She collided with my chest, throwing her arms around my neck with a desperate, crushing force. "Mom," she sobbed, burying her face into the collar of my wool coat. "You came. You actually came for me." I dropped to my knees right there on the icy driveway, wrapping my arms tightly around her small, trembling frame. I buried my face in her hair, breathing in the scent of my daughter. I held her with a fierce, territorial grip, silently vowing to slaughter anyone who ever tried to touch her again. We stayed like that for several minutes, anchored to each other in the center of the flashing red and blue lights. Courtney stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped tightly around her own torso. She watched us with a shattered, hollow expression, finally understanding the catastrophic magnitude of what she had helped steal from me. The harsh glare of the news helicopter spotlights suddenly shifted toward the main gate. A sleek silver luxury sedan aggressively bypassed the police barricade, ignoring the shouts of the uniformed officers trying to secure the perimeter. The car skidded to a halt near the edge of the driveway. The rear doors flew open. William and Catherine stumbled out into the freezing night. My parents had somehow found their way from the financial district to the suburbs, likely tracking the live news broadcasts on their phones. They were completely bankrupt, their offshore accounts drained to absolute zero, but they still knew how to perform for an audience. Seeing the dozens of news cameras pointed at the estate, Catherine instantly plastered a mask of exaggerated maternal terror across her face. She sprinted toward the flashing lights, waving her arms dramatically to ensure the reporters caught her best angle. "Oh, thank God," Catherine wailed, projecting her voice loudly enough to be picked up by the news microphones. "Our family is safe. We were so terrified when we heard about the hostage situation." William flanked her, nodding grimly for the cameras, playing the role of the steadfast patriarch who had just endured a harrowing ordeal. They shoved past a bewildered federal agent rushing directly toward where I was kneeling with Lily. They were about to spin a brand new narrative on live television, framing themselves as the frantic, loving grandparents who had desperately prayed for our safe return. They were going to pretend they had not just tried to have me thrown in a psychiatric ward hours earlier. I slowly stood up, keeping Lily safely positioned behind my back. I looked at the news cameras recording every second of this encounter. Then I turned to face my parents. William pushed past a federal agent, his arms outstretched in a perfectly calculated display of paternal relief. His face was a mask of manufactured anguish, his eyes wide and pleading for the benefit of the dozens of high-definition news cameras capturing the scene. Catherine flanked him, practically leaning into the harsh glare of the helicopter spotlights, dabbing at her dry eyes with a designer handkerchief. "Oh, my sweet girl," William cried out, his voice booming over the chaotic hum of the idling emergency vehicles. "We were so terrified. Thank heaven our family is finally safe." He stepped forward, reaching out to wrap me in the same arms that had forcefully shoved me out of their country club estate 13 years ago. I did not flinch. I did not lower my gaze. I took one deliberate freezing step backward. William's hands grasped empty air. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of panic cracking his perfect facade as he realized I was not going to play my assigned role. "Amber, please," William hissed through clenched teeth, his smile remaining frozen for the cameras while his voice dropped to a vicious, desperate whisper. "Do not do this right now. We are broke. Brandon took everything. We need your money to survive this. Play along for the press, and we can handle our business in private. If you ruin us on television, you ruin the family name forever." "Do not touch me," I commanded. My voice was not a scream. It was a low, lethal blade that sliced through the bitter Chicago wind, loud enough for the closest news microphones to pick up every single syllable. Catherine let out a theatrical gasp, clutching her chest. "Amber, sweetheart," she whimpered, turning slightly to ensure the reporters saw her distress. "You are in shock. The trauma of the evening has confused you. We are your parents. We love you. We have always loved you." I stepped around William and walked directly toward the barricade where the local and national press had congregated. The reporters shoved their microphones forward, hungry for a statement from the tech CEO who had just orchestrated the downfall of a massive political empire. I looked straight into the lens of the primary broadcast camera, completely ignoring my mother-fake tears. "My name is Amber," I announced, my voice steady and echoing across the frozen driveway. For 13 years, the two people standing behind me have peddled a fabricated narrative to protect their social standing and finance their luxury lifestyle. They told the world I was a violent, unstable drug addict. They claimed Brandon stepped in as a savior to rescue my daughter. They lied. They lied to the courts, they lied to the press, and they lied to this entire city. The reporters erupted into a frenzy of shouted questions, but I held up a single hand, silencing them instantly. "They did not rescue my daughter," I continued, pointing a sharp finger back at William and Catherine. "They sold her. 13 years ago, Brandon purchased the illegal narcotics used to frame me. He planted them in my apartment and he committed perjury on the stand. But he did not act alone. He needed to buy the presiding family court judge to ensure I lost custody permanently. He needed $250,000 in untraceable cash. I turned back to face my father. William's skin had turned the color of wet ash. He was shaking his head frantically, mouthing the word "no" over and over again, but he was completely paralyzed by the sheer terror of public exposure. "That bribe did not come from Brandon," I stated, projecting my voice, so every single person on the estate heard the undeniable truth. "The money used to bribe the judge and steal my infant daughter was wired directly from William's personal offshore retirement account. My own parents funded the destruction of my life. They financed a monster, handed him my child, and forced my younger sister into a 13-year marriage built on psychological abuse and financial exploitation, all because they preferred the illusion of a wealthy, politically connected son-in-law over a daughter who dared to forge her own path." The media barricade exploded. Camera flashes strobed like lightning. Reporters yelled rapid-fire questions at William and Catherine, demanding to know if they had funded a corrupt judge. Catherine's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the freezing pavement, hiding her face behind her ruined designer handbag, sobbing hysterically as the camera zoomed in on her humiliation. William staggered backward, holding his hands up to shield his eyes from the blinding spotlights, muttering incoherent denials that nobody believed. They thought my public execution was over. They were wrong. I had one final devastating strike to deliver. Simone stepped out from the shadows of my armored SUV. She walked across the driveway, her heels clicking sharply against the asphalt. She handed me a thick-bound legal folder bearing the official seal of the federal court. I took the folder and walked back over to my father. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with absolute pathetic dread. "You care so much about your wealth and your public image," I said softly, standing directly over him. "Let us see how much you love them now." I dropped the heavy legal binder directly onto William's chest. "You have just been officially served," I declared, stepping back so the cameras could capture the moment. "This is a massive civil lawsuit filed in federal court. I am suing both of you for civil conspiracy, intentional infliction of severe emotional distress, fraud, and defamation. The damages I am seeking will completely liquidate whatever pennies Brandon left behind in your accounts. You are going to spend the rest of your miserable lives paying me back for every single second you stole from me. You are ruined, both socially and financially." William let out a gut-wrenching sob, clutching the lawsuit against his chest, as if it were a physical wound. Catherine wailed loudly, rolling on the icy ground, begging the reporters to turn their cameras away, but the press showed zero mercy. They documented every agonizing second of their absolute social annihilation. The high society titans of Chicago had been reduced to weeping, pathetic frauds on national television. I did not stay to watch them grovel. I turned my back on them for the last time. I walked over to Lily, who was standing safely behind my security chief. I gently wrapped my coat around her shivering shoulders. Courtney stood beside her, holding her head high, finally free from the invisible chains our parents had wrapped around her neck. "Let us go home," I told them. Simone opened the door to the lead vehicle. I guided Lily and Courtney into the warm, secure cabin of the armored SUV. I climbed in behind them and slammed the heavy door shut. My security detail piled into the flanking tactical vehicles. The massive engines roared to life in perfect unison. Our fleet of black SUVs aggressively pulled out of the estate, leaving William and Catherine sobbing in the dirt, permanently trapped in the blinding, unforgiving glare of the media spotlights. The flashing lights of the media helicopters faded into the distance as our motorcade merged onto the highway. I did not look back at the estate. I only looked forward at Lily, who was finally sleeping peacefully against my shoulder. The war was over, but the absolute annihilation of my enemies was just beginning. 4 weeks later, the cold reality of federal justice crashed down on the man who had stolen my life. Brandon sat shivering in a sterile concrete holding cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in downtown Chicago. He wore a faded orange jumpsuit that hung loosely off his diminishing frame. The polished, untouchable political candidate was completely gone. In his place sat a desperate, terrified man facing 40 years in federal prison for racketeering, bribery, and severe child abuse. The heavy steel door to his visitation room clanged open. His high-priced defense attorney stepped inside, sliding a single sheet of paper across the metal table. Brandon lunged forward eagerly, asking about his bail hearing and offshore accounts. The attorney did not sit down. He coldly informed Brandon that the FBI, utilizing the decrypted ledgers my company provided, had successfully seized and frozen every single cryptocurrency wallet he possessed. The Cayman Islands shell companies were dissolved. His political campaign funds were seized as evidence of wire fraud. He was absolutely penniless. The attorney formally withdrew as his legal counsel on the spot, citing unpaid retainers, and walked out of the room. Brandon collapsed against the metal table, sobbing uncontrollably as the heavy steel door locked him inside his living nightmare. While Brandon rotted in federal lockup, the financial shockwave obliterated William and Catherine. My civil lawsuit for conspiracy, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress hit them like a localized nuclear strike. Because the evidence of their bribery was undeniable, the federal judge granted an immediate freeze on all their remaining domestic assets to secure the pending judgment. The bank moved forward with the foreclosure on their massive country club estate. I made sure the eviction was swift and entirely public. 2 weeks after the gala, elite auctioneers descended upon the property. The grand, sweeping driveway where they had once hosted affluent cocktail parties was now lined with moving trucks and aggressive bargain hunters. I watched the live auction feed from my office monitor. Their fleet of luxury vehicles, the imported sports cars and customized SUVs, were sold off for pennies on the dollar to settle their mounting legal debts. Their expensive artwork, the antique furniture, and even Catherine designer jewelry collection were auctioned off to the highest bidder. Their wealthy country club friends did not offer them a single dime of support. The same politicians and socialites who used to drink their expensive wine now blocked their phone numbers, treating them like a highly contagious disease. Stripped of their wealth and completely excommunicated from high society, William and Catherine were physically escorted off the estate by the local sheriff department. They stood on the sidewalk in the freezing rain, holding nothing but 2 generic plastic garbage bags containing a few basic sets of clothing. They had no offshore accounts to fall back on. They had no golden son-in-law to bail them out. They had absolutely nothing. Desperation is a powerful equalizer. It completely strips away arrogance and exposes the raw, pathetic core of a person. 3 days after their eviction, William and Catherine dragged themselves through the heavy rain to the towering glass headquarters of Zenith Cyber Defense. They did not arrive in a chauffeured town car. They arrived on foot, shivering and soaked to the bone, having scraped together their last few coins just to ride the public transit bus. They stumbled through the revolving glass doors of my corporate lobby. The polished marble floors immediately reflected their ruined state. Catherine makeup was smeared down her face, her hair matted against her skull. William's tailored suit was heavily wrinkled and stained with mud from the street. They rushed the front reception desk, weeping hysterically and begging the security personnel to let them upstairs. They claimed they had made a terrible mistake. They cried out that they were my parents, that they were starving, and that they just needed a chance to explain. I sat in my top-floor command center, watching their pathetic display on my high-definition security monitors. They were not demanding access to my wealth anymore. They were begging the lobby guards for an application to work in my corporate mailroom. Catherine was sobbing loudly, offering to scrub the cafeteria floors on her hands and knees if I would just pay her a minimum wage so they could afford a cheap motel room for the night. They wanted my pity. They wanted the very compassion they had violently denied me for 13 agonizing years. I did not go down to the lobby. I did not grant them the privilege of seeing my face or hearing my voice ever again. They had forfeited the right to my presence the moment they paid a corrupt judge to rip my infant daughter out of my arms. I pressed the intercom button on my desk, routing my voice directly to the earpiece of my head of security stationed in the lobby. Remove them from the building, I ordered, my voice devoid of any hesitation or warmth. On the security feed, my guards immediately stepped forward. They grabbed William and Catherine by the arms, completely ignoring their frantic apologies and desperate wailing pleas. The guards physically dragged them backward across the pristine marble floor, shoving them forcefully through the revolving doors and out onto the freezing rain-soaked concrete of the city curb. As William and Catherine collapsed onto the wet sidewalk, shivering and weeping into their hands, my head of security stepped out into the rain. He did not offer them a coat or a dollar. He simply reached into his pocket and tossed a single folded piece of printer paper onto the wet pavement right in front of them. It was a printed map detailing the exact walking route to the most overcrowded, underfunded homeless shelter on the south side of Chicago. The security feed clicked off. I watched the live monitors go dark as my guards stepped back inside the climate-controlled lobby, leaving William and Catherine shivering in the freezing rain with their printed map. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I turned my chair away from the surveillance screens and faced the two people sitting across my massive obsidian desk, Simone and Colin. Simone looked immaculate in a tailored ivory suit, her posture radiating the kind of absolute confidence that only comes from walking through fire and emerging completely unburned. Colin, my younger brother, sat beside her. For 13 years, Colin had been the quiet shadow in our toxic family. He had kept his head down, avoiding William and Catherine and their manipulations by simply existing in the background. But when the defining moment arrived, he had not stopped Simone from risking her career to save my daughter. He had finally chosen the right side. I slid a heavy leather-bound portfolio across the desk. It stopped perfectly in front of Simone. "Open it," I commanded gently. Simone flipped the cover back. Her dark eyes scanned the dense legal text, her sharp legal mind processing the numbers and clauses with blinding speed. She looked up, her expression a mixture of profound shock and guarded professionalism. "This is an employment contract for the position of lead general counsel for Zenith Cyber Defense," Simone stated, her voice steady but laced with disbelief. "Amber, this compensation package is more than double what I was making as a senior partner at my old firm. You included equity shares, a massive signing bonus, and full autonomous control over your entire corporate legal division. You put your career, your freedom, and your life on the line to smuggle that flash drive to me at the gala," I replied, leaning forward. "You stood up to a corrupt police force with a federal injunction when my own parents were cheering for my arrest. You are the reason I got my daughter back. You do not just deserve a job, Simone. You deserve an empire." Simone closed the portfolio. She did not cry or offer weak protests of gratitude. She simply nodded, accepting the power she had rightfully earned. My old firm called me this morning. She mentioned a razor-sharp smirk playing on her lips. The senior partners realized the embezzlement charges Brandon planted were completely fabricated. They begged me to return. They offered me a corner office. I smiled coldly. Tell them your new corner office occupies the entire top floor of the Zenith Tower, overlooking the exact courthouse where we destroyed Brandon and his political machine. Simone extended her hand across the desk. I shook it firmly, sealing an alliance that no one would ever be able to break. I shifted my gaze to Colin. He looked down at his hands, the weight of a decade of silence pressing heavily on his shoulders. He took a deep breath and met my eyes. William called me an hour ago. Colin said, his voice thick with unresolved emotion. He called from a payphone near the transit station. I was crying. He begged me to wire them money for a hotel room. He told me you had lost your mind and thrown them out onto the street without a dime to their names. I sat perfectly still, waiting to see exactly who my brother had become. I told him I watched the news. Colin continued, his jaw tightening with newfound resolve. I told him I heard the recording of him and Catherine financing the destruction of your life. I told him that he and Catherine were completely dead to me. Then I hung up the phone and blocked their numbers. I contacted my bank and severed the joint accounts they forced me to maintain since college. They cannot touch my family anymore. Colin leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the edge of my desk. I am so sorry, Amber. I was a coward. I watched them tear Lily out of your arms 13 years ago, and I stayed silent because I was terrified of losing my inheritance. I let them paint you as an addict. I let Brandon play the hero. I will spend the rest of my life making up for that silence, but I need you to know that I am standing with you and Simone, always. I looked at my brother, seeing the genuine remorse burning in his eyes. I did not offer him a warm, tearful embrace. Forgiveness was a marathon, not a sprint. But I gave him a definitive nod, acknowledging his defection from our parents and their toxic regime. You protected Simone when she moved against them, I said quietly. That is a start, Colin. We build from here. The heavy wooden doors of my office swung open. My security chief stepped inside, his expression grim. Courtney is awake, he reported, keeping his voice strictly professional. The medical team cleared her of any severe physical trauma from the panic room, but she is highly agitated. She is demanding to speak with you. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored jacket. My younger sister had been resting in a secure luxury guest suite on the lower floors of my corporate headquarters since we pulled her out of Brandon freezing vault. She was physically safe, but the psychological and financial reality of her shattered existence was about to hit her like a freight train. I took the private elevator down to the residential tier. I swiped my keycard and entered the massive, sunlit suite. Courtney was pacing frantically across the hardwood floor, wearing a plush robe over her clothes. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hands shaking as she clutched a printed financial statement my accounting team had provided at her request. Amber, Courtney gasped, rushing toward me the second I walked through the door. This has to be a mistake. The accountants are telling me Brandon leveraged my entire identity. The offshore accounts are seized by the federal government. The properties are in foreclosure. The credit lines are maxed out in my name. I have absolutely nothing left. It is not a mistake, I replied coldly, stepping further into the room. He used you as a shield for his illegal campaign contributions and a piggy bank for his mistresses. You are completely bankrupt, Courtney. Every single dollar is gone. You have to help me, she pleaded, tears spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. You are a multimillionaire. You own this entire building. You can pay off the debts. You can set up a trust for me. We are sisters, Amber. You have to save me. I stared at her, analyzing the desperate, entitled panic in her eyes. For 13 years, she had lived a life of absolute luxury, sleeping comfortably down the hall from my stolen daughter. She had never questioned the source of her wealth. She had never questioned the convenient, violent removal of her older sister. She expected me to pull out a checkbook and magically erase the consequences of her willful ignorance, just like William and Catherine had always done for her. I stepped closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. I am not William, I stated, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving register. I am not Catherine. And I am certainly not Brandon. I am not going to write you a blank check to fund a life you did not earn. I am not going to coddle you, Courtney. Courtney staggered back, her breath catching in her throat as the reality of my refusal set in. But I have nothing, she whispered, terrified. How am I supposed to survive? I crossed my arms, delivering the ultimate reality check. You expect a bailout because you have never faced a single consequence in your entire life. You stood in that courtroom 13 years ago and watched a judge declare me an unfit mother based on lies you knew were fabricated. You played house with my child. You wore diamonds bought with my stolen time. I will not let you starve on the streets, but I will absolutely not finance your delusion. You are going to do exactly what I had to do 13 years ago when this family threw me out. You are going to earn your independence. I stepped back, letting my words sink into the suffocating silence of the luxury suite. Courtney stared at me, her chest heaving, as she finally grasped the absolute reality of her situation. There was no hidden trust fund waiting to catch her. There was no golden parachute designed by our parents to soften her fall. I pulled a standard corporate employment contract from my jacket pocket and dropped it onto the glass coffee table between us. This is a contract for a data entry clerk in the lower compliance division of Zenith Cyber Defense. I stated, my tone strictly professional. It pays entry-level hourly wages. You will receive standard corporate health benefits, but you will get absolutely no executive perks. You will not have access to the executive elevator, the catered dining room, or my private penthouse floor. You will clock in at exactly 8 in the morning, and you will clock out at 5. If you are late, your pay will be docked. If you underperform, you will be terminated. Simone will be your ultimate department head, and I can assure you, she will not show you a single ounce of preferential treatment. Courtney looked at the standard black and white document. A week ago, she would have laughed in my face and thrown a crystal glass at the wall. She would have called William and Catherine to complain about the sheer indignity of manual labor. But William and Catherine were currently wandering the freezing streets looking for a bed at a municipal shelter, and her husband was sitting in a federal holding cell facing 4 decades behind bars. Slowly, Courtney reached out with a trembling hand. She picked up the pen resting beside the contract. She did not argue. She did not beg for a management position. The shattering of her perfect stolen life had finally broken the toxic conditioning our parents had instilled in her since childhood. She signed her name on the dotted line, handing the contract back to me with quiet, devastated humility. "Thank you," Courtney whispered, her voice cracking. "I know I do not deserve this." "You do not," I agreed coldly, "but you are going to earn it." The transition was brutal for her, but I did not intervene to soften the blow. I watched her transformation through the building security cameras over the next few weeks. Courtney sold her remaining designer jewelry to a local pawn shop just to secure a lease on a tiny walk-up apartment in a working-class neighborhood. She traded her chauffeured luxury vehicles for a plastic transit card. Every morning she rode the crowded Chicago subway, standing shoulder to shoulder with exhausted commuters. She arrived at the Zenith Tower, wearing simple generic office attire, sitting in a gray cubicle under the harsh fluorescent lights of the 4th floor. Simone oversaw her department with ruthless efficiency. She assigned Courtney the most tedious, mind-numbing document archiving tasks available. Courtney did not complain once. She kept her head down, ate a packed sandwich at her desk, and did the hard work. She was finally learning the value of a dollar she actually had to sweat for, completely stripped of the unearned privilege that had shielded her from reality her entire life. The real test of her redemption, however, was not her work ethic. It was her relationship with Lily. For 13 years, Courtney had played the role of the devoted mother to my biological child. She had happily accepted the title while knowing I was agonizing in exile. Stripping that false title away was a strict, non-negotiable boundary. I arranged a highly supervised, heavily monitored meeting in a neutral therapy office so Courtney could formally address my daughter. I sat beside Lily on a comfortable sofa, holding her hand tightly. Courtney sat across from us, looking visibly nervous. She did not try to cross the room. She did not demand a hug. She kept her hands folded in her lap, respecting the physical distance I had strictly mandated. Lily, Courtney began, her voice steady, but laced with profound sorrow. "I need to apologize to you. I lied to you for your entire life. I let you believe a story about your real mother, because I was too weak and too selfish to stand up for the truth. I watched him hurt you, and I did nothing. I am so incredibly sorry. Lily squeezed my hand, leaning her weight against my shoulder. She looked at the woman who had raised her under false pretenses. You are not my mom, Lily said quietly, her voice possessing a heartbreaking clarity. Amber is my mom. I know, Courtney replied, tears sliding down her cheeks, though she made no move to wipe them away. I am just your Aunt Courtney, and I hope maybe a long time from now you can forgive your aunt for failing you. It was the first genuinely selfless act I had ever seen my sister perform. She voluntarily relinquished the stolen title, stepping back and allowing me to rightfully occupy the maternal role I had bled to reclaim. Lily did not offer immediate forgiveness, but the tension in her small shoulders noticeably relaxed. The terrifying, confusing illusion of her past had been shattered, replaced by the honest, undeniable truth. Later that evening, the sprawling, multi-million-dollar penthouse felt incredibly peaceful. The fierce Chicago wind battered the reinforced glass windows, but inside the temperature was perfectly controlled and warm. I was sitting on the plush velvet sofa in the main living area, reviewing a quarterly cybersecurity report on my tablet. Lily was curled up next to me, a thick cashmere blanket draped over her legs. She was reading a novel for her new private school literature class, her head resting comfortably against my arm. It was a scene of domestic tranquility I had fought a brutal, relentless war to achieve. But the psychological scars of 13 years of abuse do not vanish overnight. Lily suddenly lowered her book, her brow furrowing with a dark, lingering anxiety. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a quiet, persistent terror that shattered my heart all over again. Mom. Lily whispered the word, still feeling like a miracle every single time she said it. Are they ever coming back? I set my tablet down immediately, giving her my absolute undivided attention. Who, sweetie? Brandon, she said, her voice dropping to a fearful, trembling hush. And William and Catherine. Are they going to find us? Are they going to come take me away again? The sheer panic in her voice ignited a fierce, protective inferno in my chest. I did not offer her empty, soothing platitudes. I did not just tell her everything was going to be fine. I operated on hard, verifiable data. I stood up and walked over to the heavy steel safe built into the mahogany wall paneling of my living room. I entered the biometric passcode, pulled out a thick legal portfolio, and walked back to the sofa. I sat down right beside her and opened the portfolio, placing it squarely on her lap. Look at these, Lily, I instructed gently but firmly. Lily looked down at the heavily stamped federal court documents. These are permanent, irrevocable, no-contact orders, I explained, tracing the judge's signature with my finger. They are backed by the full authority of the federal government. Brandon is never getting out of that maximum security prison. And William and Catherine are legally barred from ever coming within 1,000 feet of you, me, or any property we own for the rest of their natural lives. Lily stared down at the heavily stamped federal court documents resting on her lap. She traced the judge's signature with her index finger, her breathing slowing to a steady, peaceful rhythm. The terror that had gripped her small shoulders for her entire life finally dissolved into the quiet warmth of the penthouse. She looked up at me, a genuine, unburdened smile breaking across her face. We were safe. The fortress was complete. Exactly 1 year later, the American justice system delivered the final crushing blow to the man who had orchestrated our nightmare. I sat in the front row of the federal courthouse wearing a tailored charcoal suit, watching the absolute destruction of Brandon's life. He stood before the federal magistrate stripped entirely of his custom-tailored armor. He wore a faded, oversized orange jumpsuit issued by the maximum security penitentiary. His wrists and ankles were bound by heavy steel chains that rattled loudly against the hardwood floor every time he shifted his weight. The arrogance, the political charm, and the venomous smirk had been entirely eradicated. His hair was thinning and unkempt, his face gaunt from 12 months in a bleak concrete holding cell. He looked exactly like what he had always been underneath the stolen money, a pathetic, empty coward. The federal judge did not offer a single ounce of leniency. He read the charges aloud, his voice echoing with unforgiving authority. Racketeering, wire fraud, severe child endangerment, bribery of a public official, and extortion. Brandon court-appointed public defender did not even attempt to argue for a reduced sentence. The mountain of decrypted digital evidence my firm had handed to the FBI was completely insurmountable. When the judge brought his heavy wooden gavel down, the sound sealed Brandon fate permanently. 40 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. Brandon did not scream. He did not fight the federal marshals as they grabbed his arms. He simply turned his head and looked at me one last time from across the courtroom well. I did not glare at him. I did not smile. I looked at him with the absolute freezing indifference one reserves for a dead insect on the pavement. The marshals dragged him through the side door, locking him away in a steel cage where he would spend the rest of his natural, miserable life. 30 miles away, on the bleak industrial south side of Chicago, William and Catherine were experiencing their own customized version of hell. They sat shivering in a cramped 300-square-foot studio apartment. The ceiling was stained with dark yellow water damage, and the radiator in the corner clanked uselessly, failing to push back the biting winter cold. There were no country club memberships. There were no offshore accounts. There were no eager waiters pouring vintage champagne. They were sitting on a cheap, sagging mattress they had salvaged from a discount outlet, eating generic canned soup illuminated by the flickering, harsh light of a pawn-shop television. They had tried reaching out to their wealthy friends for months. Every single phone call had been ignored. Every email went unanswered. The elite society they had worshipped and sacrificed their own daughter for had excised them like a malignant tumor. They were social pariahs, completely bankrupt and utterly forgotten by the world. Catherine pulled a frayed woolen blanket tighter around her shoulders, staring blankly at the scratched television screen. A financial news network was broadcasting a live primetime special. The anchor voice cut through the damp, freezing air of the studio apartment. Tonight, we are honored to feature the undisputed titan of the cybersecurity industry, the anchor announced, turning to the guest seated across from him. She single-handedly exposed a massive political corruption ring while expanding her corporate empire globally. Ladies and gentlemen, Forbes Magazine Tech CEO of the Year. The camera cut to a high-definition close-up of my face. I was sitting under the bright studio lights wearing a brilliant sapphire blouse projecting absolute untouchable power. William dropped his plastic spoon. It clattered against the cheap laminate floor. He stared at the screen, his chest heaving with ragged, agonizing breaths. Catherine let out a hollow, devastated sob, burying her face in her hands. They were watching the daughter they had discarded, the daughter they had allowed a monster to destroy, being crowned as a visionary leader on national television. They were freezing in the dark, watching my empire burn brighter than the sun. They had traded a diamond for a handful of dirt, and now they had to choke on it for the rest of their pathetic lives. Far above the freezing streets, high above the squalor of my parents, and the steel cage holding Brandon, I stepped out onto the sprawling glass balcony of my Chicago penthouse. The city skyline sparkled beneath me, a vast grid of lights stretching out toward the dark expanse of Lake Michigan. The night air was crisp, but the outdoor heat lamps kept the terrace perfectly warm. I heard the sliding glass door open behind me. Lily stepped out onto the balcony, her eyes bright and full of vibrant, unbroken life. The dark shadows that used to haunt her expressions were completely gone. She was wearing a comfortable, oversized sweater, carrying 2 crystal flutes and a bottle of sparkling apple cider. She walked over to me, her face beaming with pure, unadulterated pride. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of heavy cardstock. She handed it to me without a word. I opened the document. It was her final semester report card from her new elite private academy. A straight, flawless column of A grades ran down the page, accompanied by glowing remarks from her teachers, praising her brilliant analytical mind and her exceptional leadership skills. I looked up from the paper, my heart swelling with a fierce, profound joy that eclipsed every single moment of pain I had ever endured. I pulled my daughter into a tight, secure embrace. She wrapped her arms around my waist, resting her head against my shoulder, completely safe and entirely loved. Before the night concluded, the private elevator chimed. Simone and Colin stepped into the penthouse, bringing an atmosphere of genuine celebration. Simone wore a sharp ivory coat, her presence commanding and vibrant, as the newly minted lead general counsel of my corporation. Colin walked beside her carrying a box of gourmet pastries. He had spent the last 12 months entirely free from the toxic shadow of our parents, building a life anchored in authenticity and integrity. They joined us on this terrace, lifting their own glasses to toast the future. We stood together, overlooking the shimmering city, a chosen family bonded not by manipulation or greed, but by loyalty, courage, and truth. The cold, sterile mansion of the past was nothing but a ghost. Here, in the warmth of the penthouse, surrounded by the people who had fought through the fire alongside me, I knew the victory was absolute. The ultimate revenge was never just about the destruction of the people who tried to break me. It was not just about the frozen bank accounts, the federal prison sentences, or the public humiliation. The sweetest, most devastating payoff was the absolute, untouchable peace I had built from the ashes. I had forged an empire, reclaimed my family, and secured a future that nobody would ever be able to steal again. I took a sip of the cider, looking out over the city I now owned, holding the hand of the daughter I had fought the entire world to save. The darkness retreated entirely, leaving nothing but a perfect, unbroken family. True family is not determined by blood, but by loyalty, respect, and who shows up when you are at your lowest. Amber's journey proves that toxic relatives will weaponize your vulnerabilities to protect their status. You do not owe abusers forgiveness just because you share DNA. Healing begins when you stop seeking validation from those committed to misunderstanding you. Real power comes from walking away, setting ironclad boundaries, and building an empire of your own. Your ultimate revenge is unapologetic success. Please share your story below about cutting ties with toxic relatives and subscribe for more daily videos right now.